Well, hello, everybody, and I'm actually addressing everybody at the same time for once, patrons and not non-patrons alike. I don't normally try to draw attention to the whole Patreon thing before the show, because I'm perfectly happy that people receive these in the way that all podcasts are received, for free, generally once a week, and on all of the available platforms. And I have a lovely thing going on as well over on Patreonville, which allows people to listen to them earlier, get more frequent releases, and get some extra material. That is one of the many bonuses of their patronage. But today I'm recording this on the day that it's going to be released for both, because it's nothing particularly special. It's something you've had before. It's the 2 episodes on the Quatermass experiment. But today is Quatermass Day. So this has been born of actually something that is required for non-patrons, because I've sort of scheduled releases coming up through the summer, and each week in August non-patrons are going to get an omnibus. That's because I've got a load of ready edited omnibuses, and it is omnibuses, not omnibi, just the same, but it's factotums. So Latin doesn't always do what you expect it to do. But yes, the omnibuses are scheduled to go. They've already gone out for patrons in the sort of the great wild out there through August, in order to put a bit of a gap between patrons and non-patrons in terms of the regular episodes of Happy Times and Places, because they've become less frequent just in my recording of them as they've got longer to do, and as I've started to involve patrons making comments and things like that. So the gap between you had closed a little bit, so I'm widening it. But you're still getting, I mean, the omnibuses actually seem to be the most popular releases in terms of downloads. So maybe a lot of you hang on to get those so that you can have the longer versions and you don't have to, I was going to say change your cassette, but you know what I mean, between episodes. And to be honest, I'd started putting the omnibuses out just as a bit of a cheat, as a bit of a, oh, well, we can have something for this week and I can just package what I've done. Although I always decide to make a little bit of extra work for myself by recording new intros and outros. So it's not entirely a total repackaging. There's something new in everything. But today, because it's July the 18th, the anniversary of the Quatermass experiment, I thought the gap that should have been filled yesterday in non-patron land, because I normally release on a Friday, and I've been scratching my head what to do, because, as I say, I've scheduled omnibuses for August, but I've got 2 gaps. I've got a gap this week and a gap next week, and I'm not quite sure what to fill them with, because everything else I've scheduled the stuff that's already gone out in the land of patrons. So I've got to come up with something to do for you next week, non-patron people. But this week, yes, because it's the anniversary, the 73rd, as I speak now, the 73rd anniversary of the Quatermass experiment, suddenly occurred to me, well, I haven't done an omnibus of the 2 Quatermass episodes that I did, which I did to tie in with the release of my book on the Quatermass experiment, which has just enjoyed yet another reprint from Ten Acre Books. They are the exclusive suppliers of it, or it's certainly the most direct way to get the book. So if you haven't got it yet, or if you know a friend who might like it, there are copies available. I'm extremely proud of the book. I'm gobsmacked with how well it's gone. It got Book of the Week in the Radio Times. It got good reviews in all sorts of places. It got an article. I was able to do an article for the Telegraph on the back of it. So I'm absolutely delighted with how it went. I think Stuart Manning, the publisher, did a beautiful job of the layout and the edit that he did, and the cover, and the fact that we have a different bespoke cover for the hardback. The hardbacks of these books, because the Quatermass experiment book is the first of many, the hardback books will always have an original cover that is different from and it sort of goes to a specific artist that we've chosen, whose work complements the style of the particular Quatermass adventure. And then we've got the sort of penguin aping orange cover of the paperback, which I also think is a thing of absolute beauty. So I thought, well, why not use this anniversary as a chance to replug the book? Because, as I say, I'm proud of it. I worked very hard on it, and people have liked it. The feedback's been great, and I'm sure there are still people out there who might not have it yet, or who you might think you need to get it for. But also are celebrating a television phenomenon, the Quatermass experiment, which it did influence lots of Doctor Who. It spawned its own follow-ups, and I am currently, writing the book on Quatermass 2, which has taken slightly longer than I'd hoped. I did miss the deadline, to be perfectly honest with you, but I'm putting the finishing touches to it over the next couple of months, and that's partially because I found somebody to interview who I had not considered existed, and uncovered this person and persuaded them to talk to me, and that's provided a lot of insight about a key element of Quatermass 2, the least known of the Quatermasses and the one that has the least paperwork existing and the least photographic material. But I am also covering the lost play The Creature, which is a bit of an enigma, and again I've uncovered a load of stuff about that has hitherto been unknown. And I'm also covering 1984, the 1954 production, because those three were all key elements in the development of the work of Nigel Kneale and Rudolph Cartier that led to Quatermass 2, which is this strangely sort of unloved creature that is, but perhaps did not make as much impact as well, it didn't make as much impact as 1984, which has gone on to be a landmark in television. And yet Quatermass 2 then did lead to Quatermass and the Pit, which is its own kind of landmark. And I'll be starting the book on Quatermass and the Pit pretty much as soon as I finish the one on Quatermass 2, although actually most of the work on Pit is done. And in fact, a couple of chapters that were due for 2 have now been moved to Pit, because I've written a bit too much for 2, and that's good. So a lot of Pit is actually good and ready to go. But I can't promise publication dates for either, because they are out of my hands, and I have to do as my publisher tells me. And he hasn't told me not to promise anything, but I'm sure he won't be grateful if I do. But yeah, it's all working out well. I think book 2 will have as many interesting facts and contributions as book 1. And as I say, I've found out some things that I didn't know, and I didn't know if the answers were out there. And some bits I'd given up on finding out, and then very late in the day, thanks to some help from some people looking in various places, and some intrepid work of my own, I'm feeling very confident about it, and it's all coming together very nicely. But in the meantime, yes, what I'm going to do as well is to make this hopefully more than just a package of the 2 episodes on the Quatermass experiment of Happy Times and Places, where I'm joined by my 2 very dear chums, John Deere and Andy Murray, the 2 people with whom I'd most like to discuss and bandy Quatermass, and who bring their own levels of expertise and very special knowledge. And I'm grateful to them both, and I'm really happy that they feature on these 2 episodes. And both men have works out there that I would urge you to follow and try out, not least the podcast they do on Quatermass, and the related works of Nigel Kneale. So that's a catch-up to give you a bit of heft prior to the repackaging of the Happy Times and Places for episodes 1 and 2 of the Quatermass experiment. And what I will do at the end as a bonus is I will give you a thing for each of the following episodes, the missing episodes of the Quatermass experiment, that are my favourite things about each of those, and probably a little bit more of this, my trademark rambling and umming and erring to try to get to a point and get derailed from so doing. It's almost like I set off on an adventure, and then something goes wrong and I go off course and get lost for 57 hours, and then what finally lands is a horrible mutant. But with that in mind, enjoy the mutant. We're going to cue the opening theme and welcome and happy Quatermass. Happy Quatermass Day. It's also Aliens Day. Aliens Day and Quatermass Day are the same. And it's also not from this relationship. Oh, there's a series of disappointed women behind me. But it's also my wedding anniversary. But I don't know if I mentioned this because I haven't listened back to the podcast. So forgive me if this is a front echo of something I'm about to say, but from the past, is that it's also my wedding anniversary of the only time I've been married. Marriage that's now over. That you could say that went off course and got lost and turned into a monster. Didn't. We're on very good terms. But I promise, and I have to say this. She won't be listening, but I promise I did not. We did not set the date because it was Quatermass Day. I was so in love, you see. I don't think I even realised. Gosh, that was a time. So in love, I didn't even realise that I'd scheduled my wedding to be the day of the Quatermass experiment's birthday, of Quatermass's very birth. But anyway, I've reclaimed it. I've reclaimed Quatermass Day from the nuptials because you can't really have a wedding anniversary of a wedding that is over. So Quatermass has prospered. Quatermass lasts where love can dwindle. That's a happy thought, isn't it? So anyway, let's celebrate this great day. And if you haven't already, please do go to 10 Acre Books and order my book on the Quatermass experiment, which is, as I say, I think a really nicely put together, irrespective of the words, the contents, which I'll leave you to judge for yourself. But I think what he's done with what I provided him, Stuart, has turned it into a really fantastic book. And it's provided a home for a number of photographs that nobody knew existed until the book came. Well, apart from a very small number of us, knew existed until the book came out. So there's beautiful visual material in there as well. So thanks for being here. And yes, non-patrons, it's nice to talk to you at the same time as patrons because I do value anybody that listens to this. I get a number of people downloading these things and lovely feedback. And I know the way that things work. And I listen to lots of podcasts I love, and I am not a patron of them. I listen to them because I like them, but I don't pay for them. And so I'm totally relaxed about this way that we do things. So keep on listening, keep on enjoying, and if you can send lovely feedback, please do. That would be amazing. But I'm grateful that you're there as well, and that there's an audience for whatever this is that I do. I feel, this new world where we can broadcast about relatively niche subjects to a willing audience is one where creative people can kind of do the stuff that they want to do, and there's somebody out there for it. So I'm grateful for that. And with that in mind, if you're out there for 2 episodes of the Quatermass experiment, getting the Happy Times and Places treatment all bundled together in one package. Oh, it's a shame there aren't 3 episodes, isn't there? Because I could say 3 will all join and become one thing. But there we go. Well, maybe myself, John Deere, and Andy Murray will all combine together to become one podcast, which will end up getting out of control and trying to destroy the world. Well, hello and welcome to this Omnibus Quatermass. It's all the masses. It's an Omnimass edition of Happy Times and Places. Normally a Doctor Who positive podcast where I, Toby Haydock, watch something and with my friends try to work out what the best things about it are. This is a sort of plug for a book and that format too.
Hello Toby, I'm Andy Murray. I'm an author and journalist. I'm the writer of Into the Unknown, a biography of Nigel Kneale that was published by Head Press. And as we both know well, our first ever conversation at Excess Malarkey Comedy Club over 20 years ago was about Nigel Kneale and Quatermass. I told you I was writing my book, you told me that you wanted to write one, and now that has come to pass, and I'm very delighted that that's the case. And my book is looking forward to joining your book on the bookshelves. As requested, to mark the occasion, I have rewatched the first episode of the Quatermass Experiment, and I have chosen 5 things that I particularly like about it, which are to follow.
Yes, normal service has been interrupted to bring you not a commentary about Doctor Who. Happy Times and Places will get back to normal in a couple of weeks' time, but we find ourselves in the midst of a very exciting period of my life, so apologies. I'm craving your indulgence because I have literally this week, 2 days ago as we speak, held in my hands for the very first time my book, The Quatermass Experiment, which is about the making of the particular television programme that I will be commentating along for the next 2 episodes of Happy Times and Places. As you heard, that was the lovely Andy Murray. What a wonderful coincidence it was that during a comedy night many, many years ago, over 20, I made a reference to something old-fashioned. I can't remember what it was, and it got a big laugh. And I said, oh, well, I can go further back from that. And then I mentioned something else, and I mentioned Quatermass, more for my own enjoyment than anything else. But it was basically to invoke something old and ancient that nestled alongside whatever it was that I'd mentioned, farthings or whatever. But as I say, largely for my own amusement, I really got to the end of the joke and just threw that in. And this chap came up to me and said about Quatermass, and how lovely. Now I have to say I got a bit of a pang of jealousy that he was writing a book about Nigel Kneale and was in contact with Nigel Kneale, because I'd harboured this desire to write a book about Quatermass and had amassed a load of material, but it hadn't really materialised, and I'd kind of dismissed any idea that it probably would. But I'm sure I said to him, yes, I'm writing a book about Quatermass, but I probably hadn't done any proper work on it for a while. And his book has come, and it's been reprinted, and it's brilliant, and he had great access to Nigel Kneale, and is a fantastic scholar on the subject of Nigel Kneale, and rather beautifully lives literally 5 minutes walk from my house. So if a bomb drops on Chorlton cum Hardy tomorrow, there's a lot of knowledge about one particular television writer that will be wiped out in one fell swoop. But isn't that extraordinary that the two of us live not far from each other? And actually, we've recently encountered Bronte Schultz, who's a fantastic academic who also knows her Nigel Kneale, and she doesn't live far away from us either. So there must be some sort of ley line here of Kneale flavour. That means so many people have gathered in one spot. Well, he was born, although he was a Manxman, he was born in Barrow in Furness in the north of England, not too far from where we are. So maybe it's something to do with that. Maybe he's echoed along geographical lines. But for those of you who usually listen to this for Doctor Who content, we are talking about the Quatermass Experiment, which was broadcast in 1953. But 6 weeks after the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in Westminster Abbey, Everest had just been conquered. The Comet jet was taking people to the other side of the world. Rationing had kind of ebbed away, and normal life was returning after the terrible period of the 1940s where World War racked the world and terrible things happened, and we asked the best of our ordinary citizens, and where the world saw things it never imagined that it would, and technology had positive and apocalyptic consequences. So all of this is in the air, and Quatermass is so relevant to so much of Doctor Who as well. So I'm going to commentate along to episode 1 of the Quatermass Experiment. I will bear in mind that some of you have not seen it, so hopefully it will be designed that you don't have to be watching along, because you may not have the Quatermass collection on DVD. If you don't have the 2 episodes of the Quatermass Experiment, they are going to be extra features on the Hammer limited edition version of the film version of the Quatermass Experiment, which is coming out very shortly and is on sale now. as is my book, The Quatermass Experiment, The Making of TV's First Science Fiction Classic, which is available from 10 Acre Films and is released on May the 12th. I have a launch in Manchester on May the 11th and a launch at the BFI in London on May the 19th. So if you're listening to this when it goes out, there is Quatermass in the air. If you're listening to this sometime after, well, I'm sure there will still be paperback versions of the book available from 10 Acre Films. So go to their website and order your copy. It is not available in the place named after the rainforest because, frankly, it seems mad to put this much effort into making something only to give the majority of the money to the people who send it out to you from a warehouse where people aren't paid very well. Anyway, let's not get into that. Let us get into the world of 1953, the birth of British television science fiction, and the genius of the writer Nigel Kneale, who was asked to fill what he called a mortal 6-week gap in the TV schedule. A lot of television at this time was filmed theatre or sort of children's series television, largely went out live. It's actually very difficult to judge the Quatermass Experiment against much which went out at this time because it is the second oldest surviving drama recording. There's a play from the previous year, It's Midnight Dr. Schweitzer, starring Andre Morel, who later plays Quatermass in Quatermass and the Pit, and Reginald Tate, who plays Quatermass in The Quatermass Experiment. And it was produced by Rudolph Cartier, who is the man behind the production of The Quatermass Experiment. So a lot of the same personnel are there in that earlier tele-recording. But it's quite a stagey piece with limited film sequences, but some interesting film sequences that are quite ambitious, very ambitious for the time. Quatermass Experiment went out live from Alexandra Palace, the rather pokey studios of Alexandra Palace, shot on Emitron cameras, which are very heavy, where you had to change the lens, sort of manually clunk it round. The viewfinder showed an upside-down image for the cameraman. It was really primitive stuff in hot studios. And, I've been there on the hottest day of the year, and my goodness, yes. So let me transport you back in time to the 18th of July, 1953, and the birth of British television science fiction. I'm going to press play on episode 1 of the Quatermass Experiment in 3, 2, 1. So, and it starts with Mars from the Planet Suite. And one of the things discovered during my research was that, which is why you should never trust the paperwork, is that the version that is on the Piers B paperwork for the Quatermass Experiment of Mars, that, if you believe the paperwork was being played, is not the right one, and also it's being played at the wrong speed. It's sped up. Now, whether this was deliberate or not, I don't know, but it's certainly not played at this speed in episode 2. We have some stock footage here. It's not actually the first footage of an orbit shot. It's actually the second, but I've painfully gone through all the stock footage, and there's various bits of stock footage in the Quatermass Experiment, and made sure I know what all of it is. There's one bit I haven't identified, but I can narrow it down. But yes, and this is narrated by John Glenn, who's not in this episode, but he joins the action next week as Dr. Gordon Briscoe. Again, the paperwork suggests that it's Stuart Mortimer, one of the crew, but it's not. It's John Glenn, and I found paperwork to back up what my ears were telling me. But again, it's just a sign that just because something is written down in the BBC Written Archive, it might not necessarily be true. And here we are in the British Experimental Rocket Group. And the first person we see is actually not Professor Quatermass. It's Isabel Dean as Judith Caroon. She was one of the best-known faces on television, and in fact in the 1950s was a very fondly held actress. And in my mum's generation, everybody knew who Isabel Dean was. And she was one of the first people I wrote to for my book, and she wrote me a lovely letter back, and we actually kept in touch for many, many years. And she was so kind and encouraging. And the two actors that we see here there's 4 personnel of the British Experimental Rocket Group. We've got Professor Bernard Quatermass here, played by Reginald Tate. I love the fact he has a sort of scientist's white coat, but also has a cravat of the leading man. And he is assisted by John Patterson, played by excellent actor Hugh Kelly in his last television role. He'd previously been in a number of productions, including Arrow to the Heart, which was Nigel Neal and producer Rudolph Cartier's first collaboration, and he played quite a vital part in that. And he is assisted by Peter Marsh, played by Murray Watson, in his first television. He doesn't do another television for 5 years. And when I spoke to Mr. Watson, who was so kind again, I had lovely letters from him, and in the end actually visited him, his home. And he lived around the corner from where Nigel Neal lived with his wife, Judith Kerr, who wrote The Tiger Who Came to Tea and Mog the Forgetful Cat and all sorts of other children's classics. But when I visited Judith, Nigel Neal had died, but I went into his office, and she had one of the key props from the Quatermass experiment in a plastic bag in the corner. But yes, she let me into Nigel Neal's office. And yes, but Murray Watson lived around the corner, and I visited him first. I visited him a few years before I visited Judith Kerr, and I dreamt of bumping into her on the way to his and availing myself of an opportunity to request an audience. But I got one, thanks to other things that occurred. Well, but I won't be shy about it. I did a radio adaptation of The Road by Nigel Neal, and Judith Kerr came to the recording of that, and I was able to speak to her and establish a contact. Contact was established. This episode is called Contact Has Been Established with Judith Kerr, and she then let me go to her house, and I got a lengthy interview with her for the book, and she is quoted a lot, as is Nigel Neal's brother Brian Neal. So I got the inside story about Nigel Neal leading up to writing the Quatermass experiment. So the wheeze is that the ship is missing. Remember, this predates any space exploration, and of course it's the British rocket group that manages to get a ship into space. And in the time-honoured tradition, which has become familiar to anyone that's particularly watched Pertwee-era Doctor Who, there's an annoying man from the Ministry, in this case Blaker, played by the actor W. Thorpe Devereux. And I love the fact that we're at a time, even though it's only 10 years away from Doctor Who starting, there's a sort of generation of actors. There aren't many actors in Quatermass that cross over into Doctor Who, and it's almost like we're in a sort of slightly different generation, and where you have actors called things like W. Thorpe Devereux and Fletcher Lightfoot and all sorts of other names that actors sort of stopped having. But Balliol Holloway isn't in this, nor is Moultrie Kelsall, but they're the sort of there is an O'Donovan Shield in Quatermass too. Actors' names that I rather like from times gone by. Poor old Isabel Dean has to do a lot of the camera being on her while she looks rather sad, because she is Judith Caroon, the wife of Victor Caroon, one of the 3 astronauts who've gone into space in this, the first manned space rocket. And there's a lot of drama in this episode while they're waiting for the rocket to come back. Now, I suspect if you were doing this today, you'd pretty much get rid of all of this, because we're kind of used to rocket flights now, and what the story of this really is what happens when the rocket returns. But remember, this is less than 10 years away from World War II, where lots of people waited with bated breath to hear of crews coming back from dangerous missions, and lots of wives like Judith were hoping, against all hope sometimes, that their loved ones would make it back. Judith, rather promisingly for something from so long ago, is a key member of the team, so she's not only waiting for her husband to come back, but she's one of the scientists who, if she gets her sums right, will facilitate his return, and if she gets her sums right, might be responsible for his death. So that's a lovely emotional pull for that character. And in the early planning for the serial, she was not his wife, and it was quite a late development for Neal to give the female character a stronger in on the action. And she is called Judith because she is named after Judith Kerr, who is Nigel Neal's girlfriend at the time. They married a year or so later. It's all right, I'm not letting myself go is a very 1950s line, isn't it? And there are a few bits like that you just have to look through the lens of what was normal at the time. Quatermass's Reginald Tate, he had been offered the part and accepted it, and then he disappears from the cast list shortly before filming begins. And I mean that by filming, because there is pre-filming done at the beginning of July. This is the 18th of July, this live broadcast. But and Neil hasn't written all the scripts by this point, but he has plotted it out enough to know what the film sequences need to be. So he has the strange position. But look at this, that we've had then about 5 seconds of black to suggest the passing of time and just to reset the action to a bit later. That would not be, you would not do that now. There's a beautifully naturalistic performance here from Reginald Tate, I think. But yes, what was I saying? Yes, so the pre-filming. So Neil has this strange thing where he's writing sequences for episodes 4, 5, and 6 before he's actually written the scripts for them, in order that those scenes are written ready for them to be pre-filmed. And there's some pre-filming at St James's Park on Duck Island, and some bombed out parts of London with the returned astronaut encountering a young boy who's playing space fiction. Neil never forgets to allude to the fact that sci-fi is the stuff of kids' drama and schlocky films. He's aware of the feelings towards the genre by the viewing public, and possibly a little bit himself. Although I've never quite got to grips with that. He's always said he's not really that interested in science fiction, and yet he writes quite a lot of it. And yes, he does invest it with character and with the tools of horror as well. That's the genius of Nigel Neal, is he tells his science fiction stories with the tools of horror pictures. And here he does the science bit. This is very much, and he referred to this later when he said, it seems a bit shocking today that you needed this scene, but he was aware of that. But it did need this scene for an audience that might not be as clued up with how things that we take for granted that we know about spaceflight. He has to have the stupid man from the Ministry turn up and have it explained by Quatermass. Now, it's useful scene setting, and again, you wouldn't really have it today. And it is a bit on the nose, where he takes the nose of the rocket off and says, right, this is what happened. But that's the wheeze of the story. A rocket has gone into space, and it is missing. It is missing for 57 hours, and it comes back, and then the real mystery starts. But before that, we have this long wait, but various things that happen that embed it in the time that it's set. As I say, the very first shot of this is stock footage of a test of a V2 rocket. Actually, the test shot was from New Mexico, I think, but the Quatermass rocket takes off from Woomera in Australia, which is where test flights did take place from at the time. And the Quatermass rocket has a nuclear motor, and of course, we're haunted by the memories of the Blitz and things falling from the sky, but also World War II was kind of brought to an end, certainly in the war in Japan was, by the dropping of something which was a weapon of the future, if you like, and the technology of the future, and as well as being a clash of the outrageous with the ordinary. We'll see lots of ordinary things and people coming up in this episode, and that's what Nigel Neal does very well, is he drops the extraordinary into the ordinary, or it's also been described as Neil is a meeting of the rational with the irrational, and we see that with some of the way that characters react to things as well. And that's an explosive, a combustible combination, appropriately for something that exists in the shadow of the nuclear mushroom. But yes, for something that has become so timeless. And the infected astronaut, for this is what happens. This is a bit of stock footage of this instrumentation that is sort of fed into the live pictures, and they'll have to have timed that very well, which is why I think some of this seems a little bit clunky, because you don't have the sort of precision of timing and the speed and the slickness that you get even as the serials progress over the 50s. Quatermass is extraordinary in the sense that there's a serial every couple of years, and television technology and indeed premises have there's another piece of, and I did identify where the stock footage comes from, but it comes to an end there before they cut back to the action, so you kind of get a blank screen again. But yeah, I painstakingly went through various different places to find out where that stock footage comes from. And actually, it's the same place as other bits of stock footage come from in episode 2. But my goodness, I had to do some searching. And I don't know if anybody cares, but it's there in the book, and I'm glad. And, you know, I couldn't tell you what it's called now because, of course, when you're writing something down, you don't commit it to your brain like one used to when I was going through libraries and stuff, and I had to remember stuff to take home with me. It sort of had to embed itself in my brain, whereas now I'll read something today and forget it tomorrow because I know that if I do forget it, I can just type it into a Google search engine again. Or in the case of Obscure Quatermass Facts, look at my manuscript. It's no longer a manuscript. It's actually a book. It's downstairs. All 70 of it. I've got 70 of it downstairs. So, yes, for something that is endured so much, it is very much a product of its time. Nigel Kneale taps into the concerns of the time, which makes the creeping atmosphere of Quatermass rather insidious, because the things that worry the characters are also things that are probably tapping in the back of the heads of the people who live in these times, which were anything but cozy. You know, we think because of the way that people talk and say things like, "Don't worry, I won't let myself go." We think of the 50s and the 40s as being rather sort of cozy and proper, but that was all just a way of expressing oneself amidst a world that was harsh and cruel, and where all of these people on screen now will have lived through things that would give a modern person living in the Western world absolute heebie-jeebies and conniptions. I mean, you know, Reginald Tate fought in World War One. Reginald Tate was injured in battle in World War One, and he did actually serve in World War Two as well, but largely as an instructor with the RAF and things like that. But Hugh Kelly, who played John Patterson, was a man who's, I understand from my research, you know, whose nerves eventually got the better of him. But that actually, you can see why he was cast, therefore, as the character that he plays, John Patterson, who we will see later on in the story start to come apart at the seams. But here we have a wonderfully Kneale thing. I mean, again, the cameras are struggling with this a little bit, because a rocket has crashed, fortunately the right way up. In the film, it's stuck in the ground, you know. Where is it? Yeah. But anyway, listen, let's not talk about the film. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because the film is not even a gleam in anyone's... Well, actually, it is. People have written to Nigel Kneale just on the strength of the fact that it's a science fiction serial being shown on the television, saying, could you send us some scripts? We might want to make this into a film. So, yeah, here is... The first person on the scene is Van Boolen, who is also the first person on the scene in Quatermass and the Pit. That's the more scene story. And here is Neil Wilson as the policeman, who is Sam Seeley in Spearhead from Space. The opening scenes of which are almost a shot-for-shot remake of Quatermass 2. So it does all... So if you normally listen to this for Doctor Who content, there is a bit. But yeah, we have a rocket smash into the side of the house, and credit to Richard R. Greenough, the very gifted designer who went on to become, you know, very senior design. Not at the BBC. He left the BBC fairly quickly. But he crashes a spaceship into the side of a house. The house is missing. You've got Katie Johnson later to win a BAFTA for playing Mrs. Wilberforce in The Lady Killers, where she has a scene where she talks about her next door neighbour saying a spaceship has been in her garden. And they have to do this. This is live, remember. This is a live broadcast where you have an old woman with a practical cat. That is an actual cat, a cacta, in a basket. And she is manoeuvred live on television down a ladder by another actor, not by a stuntman or a safety officer. They did get the ladder into rehearsals in order that they could practice this scene. But that's no mean feat. And this is a set where the top of the set, the half bedroom, and remember it's a half bedroom because the other half has been smashed away, has to support an actress who's brave enough to get up there. What is obviously, just a flat behind, so she would have probably had to have gone up via a ladder that side as well. And this is a very Nigel Neal thing of having this sort of rather benign and charming old lady who's not unlike Judith Kerr was in her later age, actually, very quietly spoken and charming. I love the way that Van Boolen is with her here as Len Matthews, the first man on the scene. And she spots her mother's clock amongst the wreckage. Are you sure this thing hasn't gone off? W. Thorpe Devereux is waiting for his cue here, or he should have been doing better listening acting, because he could have come in at any point there. But yeah, that's another slightly. They have one go at this, and then it goes out, and there's no possibility for post production or performance tweaking or anything like that. So it's hard to do this stuff, especially with such ambition. You've cut from a scene, which is literally bang next to where they are. This is all in the tiny studios at Alexandra Palace. Everything is not far from each other, and the actors moving from one scene to the other, sometimes getting changed, jumping over cables. The cables of the cameras have to not go over each other. There's no pause, and the things that they're being asked to do are high-end and extraordinary. And a lot of television is people talking in rooms, and this is hugely, hugely ambitious. And here we now cut to something which is I think one of the benefits of the need to broaden these stories out with characters and with scenes that are just dialogue. You have Oliver Johnston here as the news editor, Jacko, although we'll come to when he asks for somebody called Jackson later. And here is Paul Whitson-Jones as one of my favourite characters, James Fullerlove, who gets some absolutely terrific lines, particularly in the next episode. And he's this sort of cynical journalist who goes through a bit of a journey. He wants something to denounce, he tells Jacko here, and his interest is piqued by this rocket story, and you get the impression that he usually does more salacious stuff, but he wants something to get his teeth into, and actually goes on a journey where he learns that his cynicism is not the way to tackle this story, and he's the journalistic equivalent of the whore with the heart of gold. I need something to denounce, yes. Yeah, after the graphologists in the English flower show, something that's somebody's fault. I like that drive that he has to go, I want something where I can blame somebody. But he's rather effete, and he's got his buttonhole, and Whitson-Jones is great. And this is Colin Davis as the fireman, and I'd sort of written off ever finding anything out about him. There was a Colin Davis with a 1986 TV credit, and I thought, well, that's not going to be the same guy. Colin and Davis aren't exactly unusual names, and too often lazy books get two people with the same name with TV credits 30 years apart and go, that must be the same person, or that actor who's a bit part in Torchwood must have written that American film. Probably not. But actually, those two Colin Davises were the same. And I worked it out because the reason he was in the 1986 TV thing was because he was a musician in it. And our Colin Davis, who plays the fireman here, was a singer and a musician. And anyway, he's got a fascinating story that links him with one of the leading writers of our time, and just goes to show that even a not great actor with a couple of lines in one episode of the Quatermass Experiment, who only has, I think, one other television credit, or certainly not many, has a fascinating story to tell. And I ended up speaking to his son and finding out some really interesting stuff about him. And in fact, I've talked about him longer than he is on screen. And he just plays a Jobsworth fireman, because one of the delights of Nigel Neal is, as well as being somebody who understands the nature of ancient horror and the fear of the unknown, is he's got a real bee in his bonnet about Jobsworths. And there's the fireman in this episode who goes, I'm going to make a report about this. There's a hospital sister in the next episode who says, I'm going to fill in a report about this. Somebody must have written a report that Nigel Neal absolutely hated, and he has a great phrase where he talks about people in television who talk about doing drafts and pitches, and he says there were no drafts of these scripts. He hand wrote them, and then they were typed up by the typing pool. And he says people who talk of drafts and serious plans are people who've achieved power by dubious means, which I rather like. And these two journalists are Patrick Westwood and Dominic Lefaux. Lefaux was somebody I could have interviewed, and I kind of, when I discovered he was still around, and there was probably a way of getting hold of him, real life had kind of got in the way. But Mark Gatiss did interview him, but couldn't find his tape, unfortunately. So there is an interview with Lefaux. And then a really weird thing happened, that an actor I worked with on a production of West Side Story, Al Barkley, got in touch with me a few years ago and said, do you know about an actor called Dominic Lefaux? He'd obviously been aware that he was in Quatermass. And I said, yeah. And he said, there's a lockup with all his stuff in it. I'll see if I can find anything. And he said he didn't throw any letters away or anything. I said, if there's anything from 1953, have a look. See if there's a diary. Is he writing up about Quatermass? Couldn't find anything about Quatermass, but he has found some films that he's just transferred. And literally this week, while Quatermass is in the air, has said, I'll send them to you, but I don't think they're lost episodes of Quatermass. I didn't think they would be. Dominic Lefaux's only in the first 2 episodes anyway. They're the ones that exist. But how funny that, but completely independently, Al, my mate, who I was in a play with, is the person that is asked to look through the remaining stuff of Dominic Lefaux, who himself was a very interesting person. I have done in the book, I've done what happened to all of the actors, including that bloke, Nicholas Bruce, who is Lodovico in Orson Welles' Othello, which is not a bad part in a film prior to this. Even this guy, MacGregor Urquhart, as the non-speaking sandwich board man, was a writer and had some stuff made for television and books published. But because I wrote the book, it's not a book where it shows off all of the classic horror short stories that I have read, because actually I haven't read that many, and it doesn't show off my knowledge of folk horror and ley lines and all the sorts of things that clever people who write academic books with lots of footnotes do, because I didn't want to write that book, but I did want to write a book where I tell you everything I possibly can about all the people in it. So everybody, including this guy, Pat McGrath, who is one of the ones that I don't come to a particular necessarily comfortable conclusion about, but I do know that the details about him on IMDb are completely incorrect. So I at least correct those. This is a really funny scene where the BBC interviewer is talking to the couple who we've seen being a bit sort of squabbly, and particularly the sort of harridan wife who's been panicking when they think that the bomb has dropped, and she's wrapped her head in the sort of hair covering that the Hilda Ogden type of thing, and she's putting on a posh voice and saying how brave her husband was, and it's a delightful bit of comedy, wonderfully played by Iris Ballard, who I think has trouble with the scene where she gets panicking about the bomb. That doesn't quite work, but I think she's beautiful in that. But we did have another slightly clunky cut from scene where Van Boolen sort of pauses because he's supposed to be sort of being cut off mid-sentence. And here we have Dennis Windham as the reveller, or the drunk, as he's described in the script book, but he's a reveller here. A lot of his dialogue is slightly improvised. Well, we would say improvised now. They're augmentations of the written word. But I like Pat McGrath's rather jolly BBC correspondent here. And this is all about conjuring an atmosphere of celebration. The whole thing that Neil wanted to do was, as he put it, strike a sour note about the optimism. So this thing has crashed, and it's initially everyone panics. They think it's a bomb. But when they realise it's a rocket that has returned from space, there's what he calls, he describes the astronauts, the returning astronaut, as a new Elizabethan hero. So there's a new Elizabethan fervour. We're at the start of a new era. Things are exciting. The world is moving further away from the war that blighted the previous decade and caused so much terror and horror and hardship. And it feels like the world is becoming colourful again. And Neil goes, well, I want to shake that up because you shouldn't be too optimistic. And all of the stuff that feels like it may take us away from the Dark Ages. And Neil is obsessed with the Dark Ages. Ancient horror is a very sort of palpable and terrible thing to him. But the things that take us out of the Dark Ages, that shine a light, the technology that produces the electricity that shines the lights, that technology could itself bring us back into a different, could sign us back to those Dark Ages, but using the most technological means imaginable. And it's a real push and pull in Neil's work that that also has the beautiful effect of juxtaposition as well, and dissonance. Neil does dissonance so well, the clashing of the ancient and modern, the possibilities for success and failure. And don't forget to bring me something back, says Isabel Dean here. That was the original title. The original title was actually The Unbegotten, but then the show was called Bring Something Back, which was a deliberately ironic title, although Murray Watson said, they laughed at the time because they thought it was so silly. But actually, that's the whole point of it. Judith sort of berates herself slightly later, saying, it was a crass and silly thing to say. This "how dare you" that Dennis Windham does rather brilliantly here. The sudden dignity of the drunk who's been hauled up suddenly taking effrontery wasn't actually in the script, so that's a nice touch from the actor. And the sandwich boardman is a very witty touch too. So the ship is back, and all they've heard is a tapping from the inside. Oh, and lovely Paul Whitson-Jones, as full of love, gets an enjoyable monologue here. Quatermass is quite dismissive of his floweriness. But they were all in such big coats, aren't they? And those studios were boiling. They must have been sweating. I do wonder if... But I suppose everybody smoked, so it will smell more of tobacco than it will have sweat. That's a moment that I've been at screenings of this when people have seen it in public, and the bit where Hugh Kelly just goes and touches the outside and goes, "Oh, it's about 100 degrees." You go, well, you wouldn't do that now. You'd perhaps use an instrument and not bare flesh. The photographer standing behind, Fred, he's called. Oh, and look at Judith Horn, little Judith Horn. There is she's not a child. She's older than she looks, but she did a lot of sort of child parts because she was older than she looked, so useful to be there and not have to have the chaperone and things that you would need for a child actress. Everybody's pausing there, waiting for the ship to open, which it does rather slowly. The photographer Fred is Malcolm Watson, who has the distinction of being in Quatermass 2 and Quatermass and the Pit. He's not credited in this though, so it's not quite distinction of having a credited part in each one. But he's in all three serials, Malcolm Watson. And here we have the returned astronaut Victor Caroon. Victor is the name of the astronaut and the monster, but not the professor. And it's Duncan Lamont with his wonderful, mournful countenance. He's like a sort of sad golem, isn't he? And here we have a film sequence, because they didn't want to erect the spaceship set just for this one scene. So it's Neil thinking ahead. He knew, because he understood how telly worked, and they had to plan this sort of stuff, even in the planning stages. And you have the empty spacesuits of the other two astronauts. So here's the mystery. Where are the two astronauts? They're not anywhere. And it looks so much better on film, doesn't it? So much better quality. Although Murray Watson, who was a marvellous and dignified actor, I think doesn't quite have it here. He's slightly histrionic. Which is a shame, which is ironically because he went on to have as good a career as anybody in this, and deservedly so. He was a fine actor, but he told me he didn't know why he'd been cast in this, because he wasn't a television guy at this point, and he didn't do television for a bit. As a matter of interest, this happens to be news, says full of love, rather patronisingly reassuring his journalistic friends. And there's the mystery. The door hasn't been opened. The suits are empty. Where are the others? What happened? And what a great way to end the episode, with Duncan Lamont's face looming into camera and the end, it says. Not the end of episode 1, the end. So you'd be given to thinking that was it. But of course, it continues over the next 5 weeks. We can see but 1 week, and that is the next week, episode 2. And we'll get into the reasons why, perhaps, when I talk through episode 2, when my guest will be John Deere, who has written a lot about Nigel Neal and produced Quatermass Live at Alexandra Palace that I was in, and I played James Fullerlove, who, as you can see on the credits, that go at a beautifully readable speed here, was played by Paul Whitson-Jones. And the music is Inhumanity by Trevor Duncan, which is a stock piece of music that is glorious and gorgeous. So, but what we can see for now, yes, we can see episode 1 of the Quatermass experiment, and I have to choose my 5 favourite things about it. So, and I think it would be too obvious to choose Nigel Neal and Rudolph Cartier, who are both instrumental in the success of this Quatermass and the subsequent ones, and the productions get better and better, the scripts get more sophisticated, and they also, of course, produced together the seminal TV version of 1984, on which I'm on the official commentary with the 2 people who will be joining me for this Happy Times and Places, with John Deere and Andy Murray. So isn't that glorious? So, but yes, Nigel Neal and Rudolph Cartier were the major TV figures of the 1950s, and that is largely due to Quatermass. But 1984 also massively put them on the map. So, but they wouldn't have probably got 1984 without the success of this, the Quatermass experiment. I was always down on this first episode, really, because I always mourned the loss of the last 4, where the action really happens, particularly the last 2. But actually, there's so much to recommend this, and it's and without this episode, there wouldn't be any more Quatermass. And although it is very much scene setting, Nigel Neal knows how to set scenes. He establishes character, he does the science bit, he does build up the tension, and he plays upon the fears of the time, and also throws in. So I'm going to try and choose things that exhibit why Nigel Neal, in particular, and also Rudolph Cartier, are so key to the success of Quatermass. Well, there would be no Quatermass without Nigel Neal. So just choosing him, I think, would be a cheat, although Andy is perfectly entitled to, because I didn't tell him what he couldn't choose, what he could and couldn't choose. But I'll buy myself a bit of time, because I think I should be able to choose Professor Quatermass himself, Reginald Tate, who I think is excellent. And the reason he doesn't play Quatermass throughout the 1950s is because almost exactly 2 years... it's 2 years and a day after the final episode of the Quatermass experiment was broadcast, Reginald Tate got out of a taxi outside his Putney home and collapsed and had a heart attack and was rushed to hospital and died. And that was just weeks before production was due to begin on the sequel to this, Quatermass 2. That's another story. But Tate, I think, displays a wonderful synthesis of sort of weariness and worry, but the weariness and worry of a hard-working man who is perhaps plagued by his conscience, and the dynamism required of a pioneering professor who understands the gravity of the situation and the need to act quickly. There is an urgency about his performance and an authority, and key to his success, a naturalism. Some of the performances in Quatermass, by necessity and understandably, and it's not their fault that due to the passage of time and the way the different ways we enunciate and conduct ourselves, might need to be run through translation software in order to comfortably hit the ears and eyes of a modern viewer. And poor old Isabel Dean, I think, suffers particularly from that, because she is playing the distraught woman, and Isabel Dean was a fine actress, and as I say, one of the first real sort of television stars, and she was so kind to me as well. But Reginald Tate, I think, is very naturalistic. You can see why they liked using him on television, although actually there were some arguments about his merits amongst the hierarchy at the BBC, which are all outlined in my book, in which I have a huge chapter that gives you everything you need to know about Reginald Tate, and dug down quite deep into his personal story. So I hope there's plenty there that is new. And if you don't know anything about him, well, hopefully there'll be nothing left to know about him once you've read my chapter on him. But he gets a deserved chapter in the book, and I think he deserves to be highlighted as one of the strongest things about the Quatermass experiment, and particularly about episode 1, where he is our guide through the potentially tedious exposition, but also he gives us what we need about to know about the danger in the atmosphere and the problems at hand, especially in those opening scenes when they're hearing from the Australian voice, which, by the way, is not credited, but is Bruce Beebe, who is one of the stars of Journey into Space, the great radio science fiction. And so Bruce Beebe plays George Harris, the Australian voice, not credited on any of the paperwork or on screen, but it is him, and I know that, and that's one of the many things that will be covered in the book that is not currently available in any other sort of cast listings or anything else. So I've made sure the cast list is as accurate as can possibly be, and there are a few anomalies that again aren't featured in the paperwork, but a little bit of digging and dissecting and cross-referencing can make me confident enough that I know who's who, what's what, and what's where. Despite and sometimes despite and sometimes in contravention of what the paperwork says. But anyway, Reginald Tate is my first choice, but I have to choose something that is emblematic of Nigel Kneale, and I think it has to be that clash of the extraordinary with the ordinary, and that is, I think, most embodied by the spaceship in a suburban street, the spaceship that smashes in half the house of an old lady, and you have the old lady played beautifully by Katie Johnson, who's got a cat, who's worried about her cat called Henry. The old lady, and so is it the rocket in the street, or is it the rocket and the old lady, or is it a bit of both? The fact that you have this charming old lady taking it all rather in her stride, which I think speaks to something of us and our nation in the 1940s and how we dealt with the terrible things that were happening, and I don't think that's to be underestimated, and I don't think that's something to be cynical about either. And I think it's important that stuff is still being echoed. It gives us a sense of a national character that I think we actually lose sight of at our peril, and our tendency, I think, to sometimes put ourselves down, which is no bad thing, because being self-aggrandizing is often can disguise shortcomings and forgive ourselves for malignancies and bad behaviours. But I think now we need a little bit. Actually, we perhaps need a little bit of national pride back. And I think, there were things that there were ways that we conducted ourselves during the darkest hour that were admirable and spoke of the great qualities of the humblest of individuals, including dotty old ladies who had to take things in their stride. And I think and I think that could perhaps not have happened at another time, which is another example of where something that just seems like it's an interesting juxtaposition, the old and the new, the ordinary, the extraordinary. Oh, look, we've got a funny old lady, but that actually speaks to stuff that was going on at the time as well, and yet has become kind of timeless. So it's contemporary and timeless at the same time, which is probably no mean feat, being able to pull off being that. So yeah, the rocket crashing into the old lady's house, I think, is a very important element of it. The third thing I would like to choose, there's a brilliant bit in Kneale's script that I think speaks to his approach to humour and to character, and it may not even be apparent in the actor tries to do it. There's a great bit where the BBC interviewer says to Professor Quatermass, tell me about the other members of the crew, and tell me about the members of the crew. And Quatermass goes, there's Charles Green. He says, there's Dr. Ludwig Reichenheim. You probably remember his experiments with rockets prior to the war, whatever it is that he says. And it says interview, and then the dialogue in the script says, interviewer, open brackets, who doesn't, close brackets. And Pat McGrath does a kind of, oh, yes, all right. And he sort of goes, yes, I do. And you sort of get the impression he's probably making that. But I think that speaks volumes. And Neil's script is full of bits like that where he'll say something about a character that is quite often, I think, probably beyond the abilities of the actors, of what they were able to convey at the time. And that's partially to do with the practicalities of how things were done, but also how things were performed. But that senses that, he's got a sense that his characters have things that go on underneath, and he can be quite snarky about people, particularly people doing jobs, which is rather gorgeous. And he remains a bit like that. If he was a good one for an angry letter, was Neil. But it does mean his characters. He has a fun sense of character about him, and even fun stage direction. So I like that stage direction and what it says about the beyond just the interaction of the two characters, but where they're coming from different places, and the sense of humour, because Neil meant a lot of this to be funny, and not all of the humour works or has carried itself through to this day. But my goodness, humour dates more than anything. But actually, the ambition and the tone of what he's trying to do with the humour, because if there is humour there, it makes the horrific more horrific, is of sound intent. And again, I think he develops this and sharpens it slightly better perhaps later on. But it all adds to that melange of dissonance that Neil is an exemplar of. So 1, original Tate. 2, the juxtaposition of the spangly new space rocket and the ordinary London street, and the combustive meeting of both. And we've added into that Katie Johnson as well, being charming and an old lady in the face of that spectacle. Neil's sense of humour, as evidenced by his attention to detail, even in the stage direction, to what he's saying about a character. I think I probably have to choose the music. Mars, Bringer of War is a great way to open. Trevor Duncan's Inhumanity is a great way to close. They didn't really have specially composed music. They didn't have many film sequences. All the things that we're kind of used to if we've been watching television, even from the 1960s. They have very little at their disposal, and what they do have has to be deployed, with excellent selection and probably a lot of listening to discs and choosing the right things. But Mars turns out to be really appropriate for Quatermass, considering what Quatermass and the Pit is all about. Although actually Mars isn't the theme tune to Quatermass and the Pit, but Mars is such a brilliant piece of music, and they've chosen an absolutely banging bit of it to open the episode with, and to open each episode with. And Trevor Duncan's closing music is also superb. So the music that is chosen that really gives this power and punch and welly and atmosphere, and I absolutely love it. And there are just a few music cues in the middle, largely to segue from one scene to the other, because again, it was quite hard to line up music exactly. They do try that a bit with Quatermass too, where there are sort of stings, but this is much more sort of dropped in, and my goodness, it's hard. A lot, and it's so ambitious what they decide to do here. And my last favourite thing is, it has to be the character of James Fullerlove. It would be all well and good having the story of scientists, investigating what goes wrong and its intrusion into everyday lives, but to have it told through the eyes of the media. Neil does this a lot. We later get a BBC van filming Westminster Abbey, which is where the Queen Elizabeth had her coronation only 6 weeks earlier, and so it becomes meta, because we see the monster that Victor Caroon turns into via a live broadcast from Westminster Abbey as we're watching a live broadcast drama. Amazing. But it's because Neil was the son of a journalist, and so we have a gaggle of journalists here, which add to the sort of verisimilitude, but also opens it out. That BBC announcer, we get the impression that this story is going round the world, and in fact, in his planning, he did want a French newsreader and an American newsreader. He wanted to open this up, and the way that he thought was the easiest way to do that was to tell it through the media in different places, and we see that in Doctor Who today, when Russell T Davies' stories, have newsreaders from all over the world showing. It's a very clever shorthand to show how events are reverberating around the world, and having this cynical journalist. I mean, the fact that he's a wonderfully written character, the fact that they get the mighty Paul Whitson-Jones, who goes on to be one of television's most recognisable character actors, and it is probably he's among the most memorable characters in this, and he's different from all the other characters as well. He's slightly cynical. But as I say, he's not unsensitive, and he gets some of the best lines, and it's a lovely performance, and it just gives a different dimension where just when it's getting all too much or getting all a bit we think we know where we are with it, we suddenly come for a little bit of poetry in the press room, and a little bit of wry commentary from Fuller Love, who is also a very insightful character as well, and helps to, and is sometimes a sounding board for members of his trade who are less nice than he is. So he's a useful storytelling device, but who is also, I think, a brilliant character. So there we have it. Those are my 5 favourite things about episode 1 of the Quatermass Experiment. Andy Murray, my friend, and somebody who has a claim to have written, far more worthy stuff about, and I suspect more intellectually rigorous stuff than I, about Nigel Neal and all of his influences and skills, and the thematic relevance of various things throughout the Neal oeuvre, is going to choose his 5 favourite things about the Quatermass Experiment. That is a thing he knows well and will have plenty of interesting things to say about.
Okay, so for my first of the 5 choices, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to choose the actual opening second of the whole thing, specifically the theme. That brilliant choice of Holst's Mars, Bringer of War, is just wonderful, and we're kind of used to it now, and especially for fans of this sort of thing, we associate it with Quatermass, but it's a brilliant choice. But also, that's a much longer piece of music. It's about 7 minutes long or so usually in performance, and this isn't the start of the piece. This is some way in. This is a real crescendo where it's been building towards. So to just open bang with that, it's so powerful. It's so dramatic and tense, and it sounds evil. It's just a really brilliant choice, and it kind of, in terms of setting the stall, from the second that this starts, I think that's a brilliant choice, and it works really wonderfully. I think even on an old TV, small TV with small speakers, the impact of that must have been enormous.
I love listening to that. Well, one, because Andy has chosen one of the things I chose, so that means I'm starting ahead. Andy is also a very quiet and unassuming man. He's a very smart man, but he's not an overly demonstrative fellow. He's very gentle and softly spoken. And to hear the enthusiasm in his voice there, this reminds us why we convene and exchange ideas and revel in the stuff that we love, because it's the stuff of life, and it gives us, it gives us it powers our blood through our veins, doesn't it? And to hear Andy speaking so passionately about that, which is basically the title music to something, and it's not even proper title music because it's just been lifted out of a record, but as he said, it's very specifically part of the music. And to hear him speak in the way that he did, not just with the insight and because he put it so well and he summed it up very well, but just the sheer enthusiasm, isn't that great? So thanks, Andy. And yes, but I'm afraid it's 1 point to me. I'm afraid you don't get any points for enthusiasm if you choose the same thing as me. All you do is give me a point. 1-0 to me. What's Andy's second thing?
For my second choice, I'm going to go for the scene with Blaker, the senior civil servant. That wonderful moment specifically when Quatermass is talking to him about sort of rocket separation, and Blaker doesn't get it. And Quatermass just quietly said, "I thought you hadn't understood." And it's really clever. It's a really brilliant piece of writing, I think, because, this is 1953, so we're still 16 years away from the moon landing. We're still quite a way away from the sort of general audience being very familiar with rocket launches and how they work. So you need to explain it to them. So you have the scene of Quatermass and Blaker, and it explains it, but does it with humour and with character. So you have Quatermass as the expert, kind of rolling his eyes that the man who has power and influence hasn't got a clue, and he's a bit of an idiot, and he's going to have to explain it to him with diagrams and a model, and in doing so, obviously explain it to the audience. So it kind of takes that necessity and turns it into a really good little clever character moment.
Oh, damn, I wish I'd put that in the book. That's brilliant. Thanks, Andy. Now that it's gone to press, now that it exists downstairs, I'm going to scribble that in my copy. A really good point. And yes, that is a telling line. I was sure that you hadn't understood. It says everything. And Nigel Kneale, who would later get very cross with how television worked, is actually predicting the future of television, because even after Nigel Kneale's death, the clued up people who know what they're doing having to explain things to idiots who hold too much power, who are incompetent. That was very, very much the state of the industry that Nigel Kneale was a pioneer in. Unfortunately, even somebody with as apocalyptic and doom-laden an attitude as he sometimes had about the future could not perhaps have predicted that the parlous state of the medium that he helped to launch would resonate with a scene in his very first 6-part original TV drama where some exposition is, as Andy said, rather artfully placed in and done through with character, wit, and humour. So yeah, he does the science bit that's necessary for the audience, but he does it in a way that is significantly less clunky than it could have been because of the deft little touches with which he scripts it. Yeah, very good. And also, damn.
And also, in doing so, Blaker becomes the forefather of every Doctor Who man from the Ministry that we're going to meet in later years, who is just going to annoy the Doctor by being a bit of a fool.
Oh, and sorry, I'd obviously cut Andy off before he'd finished his point, because I haven't heard these before. So I'm that bit about the Doctor Who's was obviously to do with the point that he'd been making about the exposition scene, and one of the nice connections with that is that one of the stupidest men from the Ministry in Doctor Who is Chin in The Claws of Axos, who is played by Peter Bathurst, who we will see in episode 2 of the Quatermass Experiment. He is one of the Doctor Who Quatermass actors, as he is one of the missing astronauts, Charles Green. So yes, it's quite fun that he becomes one of the characters that Andy was talking about there.
My third choice, I'm going to go for the scene at the crash site, the first time we see it, which is a real contrast to what's gone before. So obviously before that, it's been quite a lot of sort of high-blown stuff with, mission central control room and talk of rocket launches and, the rockets going very far off course and so on and so forth. And then he grounds it totally. On one level, this is an amazingly ambitious thing to try and do, to try and realise the aftermath of a rocket crash on live television, but in doing so, he does it with real sort of a real lightness of touch and real humour. You've got Len Matthews and his wife, and specifically, I think you've got Katie Johnson as Miss Wilde looking out for Henry the cat, and it's all just very sweet and just very normal. It brings it down to earth, doesn't it? Sort of very literally. And there's that lovely moment where Miss Wilde said, "Have they started again?" So it's, as extraordinary as all this stuff is, you're kind of reminded that these are people who've lived through extraordinary times. But I just think, as a whole, that particular scene is just a brilliant way to achieve what needs to be achieved, to show the aftermath of the rocket launch, but also to bring it into reality and to make it feel a lot more human and maybe even quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think we maybe used slightly different methodology, but I think we arrived at the same destination. I think there were enough of the same things in that I get the point for that. Yes, and I should have highlighted actually when I was talking about the humour is that I do think the way that Iris Ballard changes her voice and says, "Yes, my husband was very brave. He should get a medal," is absolutely brilliant. And if you've ever met anyone from that generation, that's exactly the way that they would react if they suddenly needed to be, putting on their posh voice or their airs and graces or doing something is beautiful. And it's a great bit of comedy, especially how we've seen them before as the sort of squabbling, and you can imagine how they are behind closed doors is very different to how they present themselves to the BBC. But yeah, I think I get the point for that, because I think Andy and I were barking up the same tree about the rocket smashing in, what it echoed, how it's treated. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, 2-1 to me. I'm taking that. I'm in a confident mood. And we all know what happens when you do something with such confidence, is that well, you can usually get lost and then return by crashing.
So my fourth choice, there's that wonderful sequence at the crash site where there's kind of a carnival atmosphere's broken out, and there's all sorts going on at the same time, and various kind of conversations, characters roaming around and conversations happening. And it's brilliantly clever, really, because nothing's really happening, and it's important that nothing happens, because if they just sort of raced up and threw open the rocket within seconds, it wouldn't have built up any kind of tension. We need to ramp the tension right up, really, until the climax of the episode. So at this stage, you've just got a lot of anticipation, and there's some serious stuff going on. You've got Quatermass and the team sort of going about their work, and the reporters are trying to get the story off them. But you've also got lovely things like Len Matthews and his wife again sort of talking to reporters, and his wife being very proud of him. Conversely, you've got the tipsy man wandering around telling everybody off for being too modest. You've got the end is nigh sandwich board man roaming around and not saying anything, but just getting his point across. I think all of this is wonderful, and I'd be tempted to choose the whole scene. But if I want to choose one moment, one thing in here, it's that moment when Judith is talking to the reporter and tells the story that Victor promised to bring her something back. And as we know, Bring Something Back was an early title for the Quatermass experiment. And knowing the story as we do, we get the meaning because we know it's going to happen. But in the context of the story, in the context of sort of storytelling, that's again another brilliantly clever moment of dropping the very first hint very darkly, because it's kind of within this story of him promising to do something nice for her. But if we're watching closely at the time, we might have noticed that this is the first hint of what's to come, that something bad is going to come back with him.
Well, yes, and that's vitally important, of course. Yes, as well as it being the sort of trite thing that Judith berates herself for it being, and Murray Watson finding so funny. It is a horrendous double meaning, because he does bring something back, but it's not a meteorite for the mantelpiece. It's not a lovely trinket. It is something unknowable. Something. The word something in Nigel Neal's hands has such relevance, because his aliens, his threats are kind of unknowable and nebulous. They are something rather than a name, a Gorgon, a Martian. It is something unreachable, something untouchable. So the word something, used by Nigel Neal, has a terrible unknowability about it, and he does bring something back, and we never quite know what the thing is. The closest we get is it being described rather gorgeously as a plankton of the ether, but brings something back. There's a terrible irony about that. His sense of humour is such that he can even apply it to actually what is the deep sadness and horror at the heart of his story, is that he does bring something back and it destroys him.
For my fifth and final choice, I couldn't not choose the emergence of Victor from the rocket. The whole episode's been building up to this, obviously, and all the characters are awaiting it, and all the characters on the scene are waiting to see what happens, what's going to come out, if anything, from the rocket. And it's done really well. It's the ramp lowers, even the timing of it is nice, because he doesn't sort of leap out as a sort of, in contrast to the scene that's gone before, which is quite sort of busy and noisy. Suddenly it's kind of pin drop silence, and then Victor Carroon emerges, just Victor Carroon, just the one, stumbles out, and it's not actually the climax, but it's kind of leads into the cliffhanger, this fact that somebody's still in there, just one person, and that moment as he comes out for me is brilliant, and it kind of it turns the story back into something that's very dramatic and full of mystery still at this stage.
Good choice, and it is superb. And I'm surprised you didn't choose Reginald Tate. Interesting. I'm not surprised you didn't choose the stage direction. Who doesn't? Although, again, I think we were sort of alluding to nearly the same things when we were picking out those little bits about the sort of scene of revelling. I just decided to articulate it through perhaps one of the most arcane references I could possibly conjure. And I'm probably not surprised I didn't choose Phil. I nearly was, because I would probably choose, because Full of Love has some gorgeous speeches in the next episode, which perhaps would make him a better choice for episode 2. But I have a different guest for episode 2, so who knows what's going to go on there. But I think I didn't quite manage to snatch a victory from Andy there. But I don't care. I'm very happy. I'm very happy that Andy is my friend. I'm very happy that I live not far away from somebody with whom I share an extreme passion. And Andy very kindly comes to my comedy night every Tuesday, which I don't mention Quatermass at every Tuesday, or have been recently. And so he's part of another part of my life that's very important to me as well. And that's really nice to have him up the road. And God, it's been over 20 years. Wow, that's incredible. So it was really important to get him on this, and he's been very kind enough to be there all the way through my journey of writing this Quatermass book, a book he could easily have written and might well have written better, but kindly allowed me to take my own sweet time in doing it. There's still 19 seconds left on this track, so let's see if he's adding anything or if I've cut him off again.
I've very much enjoyed rewatching that first episode, any excuse really, and I hope you have too. I think I can pretty much guarantee that you did. And last but not least, hearty congratulations to you on the occasion of publication of the book.
Thanks, Andy. Well, yes, and that is why I'm sorry, Doctor Who fans, but I make no apology. Well, I've just said I'm sorry, so I've made sort of an apology for derailing your Doctor Who listening, actually halfway through a story, but that's okay. Quatermass itself Quatermass Experiment suffered its own interruptions. Episode 6 did have a technical breakdown. To talk about Quatermass, which I will be doing this week and next week on Happy Times and Places. If you're a Doctor Who fan, you will love Quatermass. I hope. It is slightly different. I mean, Doctor Who is the thing closest to my heart, but Quatermass is special and it's amazing. I'm overjoyed that it is a passion shared by a certain Mark Gatiss, and as a result, I've got to know him more than a little bit through that, and I've been so lucky to have very painstakingly managed to make contacts and get hold of things and materials that even 5 years ago would have been undreamable and unreachable. And it just goes to show, I have to say, because I entertained the idea of writing a book about Quatermass in 1989, when the Quatermass experiment was 36 years old. It is 36 years later, and finally that book has appeared. I'm immensely proud of it. Of course, as I've got it now, and as I listen to Andy talking, there are things I wish I'd said. There are probably typos that have crept in, even some factual mistakes. I do hope not. It's amazing how when it's all there, though, and it's all a bundle, we made some last-minute changes of things that I thought, why hadn't I noticed that the previous 90 times I've read it? And there are, of course, probably things that I would do differently. But the fact that it exists, when so many times over the years where I thought that it was just a dream or it was just something I said, but I never really believed would happen, because it's important that there are books about Quatermass. It's important, I think, that it has the testimony that it deserves, because it is not a piece of cult television. It is a television milestone. The people who made it were exemplars of their craft, and the work that they did massively influenced the development of the medium, but they weren't just stepping stones towards great stuff that we had since. They were great in and of their own right, and they remain, I think, magnificent achievements. Even compared to the other two serials that we have all of as well, the relatively clunky and primitive and occasionally stodgy The Quatermass Experiment, there is still so much that is marvellous, even though it's quite hard to discern these days because the pictures that we have aren't of the best quality either. But it's worth, it's the metaphor I've used earlier, running it through your translation software in order to appreciate it for what it was saying at the time and how it was saying it, because there's still so much in there that is really, really impressive. And Nigel Kneale was a genius. Rudolph Cartier, the producer, was a genius. And there are some great actors in there too, and some wonderful lines. And it's a story from its time, of its time, that resonates like a nuclear explosion, which was threatening to happen at any time, or was waiting in the wings, and actually has been waiting in the wings ever since. We were all in the shadow of technology that can, unlock our salvation or open the door to our destruction. And that is one of the things that Nigel Kneale was wrestling with. That is something that still is being wrestled with by us as a species today. It's brilliant stuff. If you haven't seen Quatermass, please do read the scripts. Read the script books that are available from Arrow, or their old Penguin ones you can pick up in car boot sales or off eBay or wherever. Nigel Kneale was a brilliant imaginative writer, and Quatermass is marvellous. So marvellous I could write a book about it. Oh, I have. It's available from 10 Acre Films, published on May the 12th, 2025. And I do hope you've enjoyed this edition. Thanks to Andy Murray for being my special guest. And I will have another special guest, the mighty John Deere, when I do episode 2, which I would love you to listen to as well. That will be at the same time next week. And don't worry, Doctor Who will return after that. But for now, thank you very much for listening to episode 1 of The Quatermass Experiment here on Happy Times and Places, which on the publication of my first solo book is definitely a very happy time and place. Thanks for listening. My name's Toby, and ta-ta.
Hello, Toby. And first of all, many congratulations on the publication of the Quatermass Experiment. I know how hard you've worked on it, and I know how long you've worked on it, and it's wonderful to see it come to fruition. And try not to think about the other 4 volumes that you're going to have to write after this. Just revel in the moment. As I record this at 8:30 on Sunday evening, that's the 11th of May, you've just had your Manchester-based launch. I hope that went really well, and I look forward to seeing you on the 19th for the second launch in London at the BFI. Hello to everybody else. My name's John Deere. I'm a writer on TV and film. I write quite a lot about Nigel Kneale and archive television. I'm writing my first book on the ghost stories for Christmas, which hopefully should be finished this year, when I can revel in that, as you are reveling in your achievements right now. And I do various other things, many of which Toby has helped with. I arranged the Nigel Neal Centenary events in 2022, which Toby hosted both of those, and appeared in dramatisations we made of You Must Listen and The Chopper. We did the 2023 70th anniversary Quatermass experiment live, which Toby played James Fuller-Love. I narrated and produced, and thanks to Toby and Simon and other people, we got us on Newsnight, which was amazing. And I've also done the afterword, haven't I, for your Quatermass experiment book. To say thank you. You've always been incredibly supportive on projects that I've worked on, and it's very much appreciated. I also do a couple of podcasts, one on Jallo and one on Nigel Neal, Bergcast, the very first episode of which you were on, talking about the Quatermass experiment. So with wonderful synchronicity, I'm on yours talking about the Quatermass experiment. In this case, only one particular episode. This is the third time I have been privileged to appear on Happy Times and Places, but I have still not had the first ever recording I did for you done yet. That particular avenue of pleasure has yet to be transversed. I think that was during lockdown, when the universe was less than half its present size. But we can consign that to a persons reported missing, which by a wonderful coincidence is the title of the second and final surviving episode of the Quatermass experiment. So I will choose 5 things to make it as easy and as fair as possible. Those things will be things that are specific to this episode. So I won't just choose Reg Tate. I may choose Reg Tate doing something or saying something, but I won't choose an actor generally. I'll do things that are that pertain directly to persons reported missing. I won't do anything in bad faith, so I won't choose The Fly as much as I'd like to. No doubt you'll talk about that. So I look forward to watching this again. I'm sure you can, to quote Bill Hicks, plaster on a fake smile and plough through this shit one more time. And I'll see you on the other side to see how close you get, or if indeed, how simpatico we are with your 5 favourite things and my 5 favourite things. 5 favourite things. It's too late. Sorry. Anyway, see you on the other side.
Amazing. John Deere, with whom I will always associate lots of lovely Quatermass things. He mentioned them there, was kind enough to get me involved in all of them, and I have to say, being in the live reading of the Quatermass experiment as James Fuller-Love was, a highlight for me, and probably the thing of all the things I've done in my life that if I told my younger self I would be doing them, I think would just go, well, life is amazing. Whereas, of course, real life crashes in and says, even if amazing things happen, life is still quite tricky at times. But we plough on, and we must never underestimate the lovely things we have opportunities to do, and the people who are important to us and that we encounter on the way. And John is one of those, and he's been, as I probably text and WhatsApp John pretty much every day. John, Andy Murray and I are in a sort of brains trust. We've got a WhatsApp that is the combined knowledge and intelligence of 3 men all wrapped up into one thing. And so anyway, let's hope we won't be manifesting at Westminster Abbey any time soon, and if we can, the pictures will be lost and you'll never see it. However, yes, so John has received his copies of my book this morning as I record this, and as I record this, it's pretty much going to go out to patrons live. I'm planning on releasing that as soon as I've put it together, because we're in the throes of the book launch, which comes to London on Monday as I record this, the Friday before. I've already done one book launch in Manchester Sunday just gone, and so John had a chance to hear episode 1 and my reaction to Andy Murray, who appropriately was at the book launch on Sunday just gone, and also has his copy of the book. So how exciting is all of that? But it's worth mentioning, actually, something that John's clearly not going to mention. He's not going to mention an actor. What the hell am I supposed to do? That's all I ever. That's all I know about. But John has told me what he's not doing the fly, although he did say in the WhatsApp that was as a joke, obviously, when I muted it, that he's going to pick the fly. So and if you don't know what the fly is, I will talk about the fly. The fly has a lot to answer for, possibly. We don't know for sure, but I missed something hugely obvious during the recording of the first episode of this, so it's worth going to the patrons as I do now with these happy times and places on the Doctor Who's. I get patron feedback, and it's very interesting because most of the people that hang around my Patreon are there for Doctor Who content, and I've had a little resistance to Quatermass content, but I can surely make no apology when I've written a book about it as putting some stuff out there, and I'm just sharing in my love for it, and I hope that it becomes infectious and turns you into a blobby mass of Quatermass appreciation. So the feedback that we have is the fantastic Sabrina Tirabassi, who's over in Italy, says, I did see the episode because I have every episode available of the 3 Quatermass serials on a 2005 DVD box set. Italy does have a good connection with Quatermass on the printed page. That's all in the book, because the scripts were published in Italy as part of a compendium, and then as the individual books, like the ones that we have over here, but translated. And I thought I should just see if they make any changes, and they do. And so I've had to painstakingly list all of those whilst translating the Italian text into English. Ah, dear. But anyway, that was quite a challenge, but I got there, and it's in the book. Robbie Carnegie says, this is the reason principal reason that reminded me to go to these, because Robbie Carnegie points out quite correctly, I would single out the names as one of the most important things about this production. When I was a boy, my parents would talk about Quatermass. I didn't know what a Quatermass was, but somehow the very name was imbued with terror. It wasn't until I watched the John Mills Quatermass that I realised it was a man. But as well as the title character, Victor Caroon is also a name that hints at creeping horror. I mean, I think why I didn't choose the name Quatermass, which is, I think, possibly the best thing about Quatermass, and it's just a name, because it's so well chosen. And of course, because then what Nigel Neal wrote and Rudolph Cartier produced, it is now inextricably linked with foreboding, terror and scares and mystery. But it wouldn't be had it been Charlton, which was the name that Nigel Neal originally put as a placeholder name. So, yeah, Quatermass. Why didn't I choose the name Quatermass? That would have been an obvious one. But John is obviously... it would be too late to choose it now, I think, anyway, for episode 2. It'd be like sort of choosing halfway through, I don't know, the Armageddon Factor and going, I love the fact the show's called Doctor Who, or I'm going to choose the TARDIS. It is worth pointing out that the name is amazing. And Caroon, Victor Caroon, Caroon is a Manx name. Neil quite often uses Manx names in a lot of stuff. I mean, even in his episode of Sharp, years later, there's a Private Skillicorn who is not in the Bernard Cromwell original book of Sharp's Gold, but Neil has added. Trevor Smith is waiting for his copy to arrive. Oh, and then he says he's had an email and his is on the way. Yes, the sort of book release has been staggered just for practical reasons in terms of them being sent out and got to people. So I hope nobody's had to wait too long. But I applaud Stuart for all the effort he's put in this week. Stuart, publisher at 10 Acre Films, which is where you can still get copies of the Quatermass Experiment book by me. Stephen says, very much looking forward to reading your book. This episode... He's talking about episode 1, that's what these comments are a response to, is a lovely reminder of Quatermass. When I was a boy, I had to go... Oh, this episode of Happy Times and Places he was talking about. When I was a boy, I had to go to Great Ormond Street Hospital, and there was a Dr. Quatermass there, much to my mum's amusement. How marvellous, Dr. Quatermass! I love that. Adam Parkin says, I'm saying this to listen on the train on Sunday. Oh, well, and I met Adam at the book launch on Sunday, so that was nice. The amount of patrons at the book launch on Sunday was fabulous. It was so heartening. I felt so much love in that room, and I was really humbled by it and the effort that people had made to come and just be really supportive of this funny little project of mine. It was so lovely to meet so many of the patrons, and we did get David suggested that we got a photo with all the patrons, and we did. So I'm pleased about that. A different David Gillespie Pratt, who was also there, said, we watched both episodes last night, and I think what Neil did well was the scene setting in his first episodes. Careful, gradual world building ending with an otherworldly twist. These 2 episodes belong to another world, not just in TV terms, but culturally too, more so than the later 2 serials. What I did find fascinating this time was the almost automatic hero worship of the crew of BR7. This week I've been reading about Captain Scott and his doomed expedition and how he's portrayed for years, often as a national hero. Explorers, even ones doomed to turn into hideous space creatures, are still to be venerated. Though you do get the sense in episode 2 of Neil that Neil is needling this attitude a little. I hope that made sense, and if not, you can sub it to make it sound right. Ha ha! That's a reference to Ryan Roger Delgado's in Quatermass 2. Great stuff, and I can't wait to hear episode 2. Yes, well, I mean, I think that's important, and I wonder now if I went into this in the book enough. I think I did, because Neil in his planning highlights very much that Caroon is a new Elizabethan hero. And I actually don't miss that world where we venerate people who do things. Now, of course, yes, I know Captain Scott is looked at in a certain way for being sort of rather foolhardy. But I think there is something about endeavour that of its nature is admirable, and possibly the people that engage in it need to be slightly flawed. You know, you need to be slightly crazy to pull off a miraculous thing. But I'm not sure the flaws matter in that sense. Yeah, the flaws matter if you live with a person or you're in a shop with a person, but what somebody represents who's achieved a great thing. I think because nowadays, of course, if somebody went into space and was brilliant and came back and discovered life on Mars or something, somebody would soon dig out an old tweet of theirs, or somebody who went, oh, I was at university with them and they're a bit of a wanker, you know, and suddenly we boil everybody down to, you know, all the weaknesses that flesh is heir to. And I think actually as a species to have lost something to venerate, to humble ourselves, and I sort of argue with the loss of religion as well, and I'm not a religious man, and used to be very cynical about religion, but actually to have something that we humble ourselves towards, that shows us that we're not amazing, or that we're not the most important thing, or the universe doesn't centre around us, and there's something external to us that is important and unreachable. It keeps us striving, and it keeps us humble, and I don't think either of those things are too bad. It's so easy now to be neither of those things from the comfort of our own home, dismissing anything and in order to make ourselves feel better and secure. And I understand where that comes from, that people need something to feel positive about. But actually, I think sometimes something that reminds you that you're not all that can sometimes bring out the best in you. So I do like the fact that there's this sort of unquestioning approval or even, you know, worship of these 3 men just for the sheer fact that they've gone into space and done this amazing thing that nobody's ever done. And of course, all that celebration is then brought into sharp focus by the fact that the truth of what has happened. Paul Murphy says, I'm listening to this on holiday, a warm spring morning in a room in Sorrento, overlooking the Bay of Naples. It's all Italy today, here at Happy Times and Places. When Italy is, whenever I've been there, a very happy time and place to be. With a cuppa on the go, says Paul Murphy. A perfect, delightful hour and a half or so. Thanks, Toby. Thanks, Paul. Chris Williams, thanks Toby, looking forward to episode 2 and also the Experiment box set with the insane amount of extras, and my book is on its way. Woohoo! I know Chris has got his book now, I think. Yes, the Quatermass Experiment box set has been announced from Hammer. That's Experiment with a big X. I'm all over that like a rash as well. Paul Dunn, I loved this, and I'm sure none of us would mind if you did a Happy Times and Places on all the Quatermass serials. There's a couple of people who might disagree with you there, Paul, if my feedback is anything to go by. But I probably will get to them eventually because, well, I'm going to do a book on all of them, and also it's why not? Jim Mooney says, unfortunately, the cost of shipping to Australia exceeds the cost of the book. I'm sorry, Jim. Is it possible to be made available through any other online retailers or as an ebook? Outside of my pay grade, Jim, but I'm going to be speaking to Stuart about various things like that. Yeah. Hold that thought. Sorry, Jim. It's, it is a small outfit and obviously not a book that's going to be mass produced, so our margins are not what they might be for other books, and shipping is of course crazy. And Joe Llewellyn says, on Saturday, waiting for it to cool off so I could work on my roof, I finally watched both episodes without distractions. Reginald Tate was very good as Quatermass, very suspenseful. I cannot wait for my copy to take the 5,000-mile journey to my mailbox, because yes, Joe is not in Australia like Jim, but he is in the United States, so it's wending its way around. I hope it doesn't get lost for 57 hours or more. So those are the comments, and I have to say the appreciation, again, from a lot of people for whom Quatermass is not a big thing. Most people have come to my Patreon for Doctor Who, and Quatermass has been slightly imposed upon them, but I hope that my enthusiasm for it and the fact that it is related to Doctor Who and has plenty of crossover means that you will get something for your indulgence. I'm grateful to you for being there, for listening. So I'm going to go in to the second and final existing part of the Quatermass Experiment, which has many magnificent things in it, and I've got to choose 5 of them. John has listened to the first episode, so he's kindly not going to repeat anything I chose for episode 1. So let's see what's on offer for episode 2, Persons Reported Missing, of the thriller in 6 parts by Nigel Neal, transmitted live in July 1953, where did that come from? Known as the Quatermass Experiment. So, episode 2 comes in with Mars from the Planets playing, but it is finally playing at the correct speed. So this is the version of Mars better known to, well, anybody that knows Mars. Whether it was played at the wrong speed by mistake for episode 1 is anybody's guess, but they've clearly corrected it. Now, so here is John Glenn, who plays Dr. Briscoe. It's a blank screen for quite a long time, isn't there? And we have our first previously on, and this is hugely theatrical. It is basically a pan along the characters with John Glenn giving a bit of what has previously happened on the Quatermass Experiment, and as each of the characters gets name checked, they sort of look towards the rocket, and that is I rather like it. I think it's sort of rather quaint and lovely, and it's artfully done by Rudolph Cartier, but not naturalistic at all. And the fact that they take a bow in episode 6 of the Quatermass Experiment, this serial that's renowned for being wholly televisual and showing what was possible to do with television, still got one foot in the theatre. But that previously on means a lot of people have speculated that unlike the later Quatermass serials where it's film sequences edited together. And that's a film sequence from episode 1 that's been cut short. It's much longer in the previous episode. They're gone. But that because Rudolph Cartier had permission initially refused because of equity agreements and various things. The head honchos at the BBC suspected he wouldn't be allowed to use clips of the actors from last week's episode in this week's episode to show what had happened up to this point. Anyway, they do sort that out. I'm 100% convinced. A lot of people have reached the conclusion that it didn't happen with this, and that episode 2 is proof that it didn't happen with this. But I'm certain that in the later episodes it is film edited together, taken during rehearsals, they'd planned which scenes to film bits of in order to cut them together, so that John Glenn, who did it for the later episodes and indeed for episode 1, would do the narration saying what had happened in the previous episodes. So that film could exist somewhere. I mean, it's hugely unlikely, but it did exist. So there was footage from episodes 3, 4 and 5, and indeed from this episode, which will have been taken at rehearsals, not from this tele-recording, to do the previously on later episodes. Now, these 2 ambulance men are not credited, but one of them is Sheldon Allen, who gets electrocuted and burnt to a crisp in Quatermass and the Pit. He's not in Quatermass 2, though, otherwise he would have been in all 3. He plays a couple of non-speaking parts in Quatermass and the Pit. And Charles Hammond, the other ambulance man, is in the film of the Quatermass experiment. So those 2 non-speaking ambulance men are both worth just hovering over for a moment, just to give them their nods to they both make a contribution. Fuller Love gets a swear word in the book. He gets various additions in the script book, which is not an exact replica of the camera script. And he gets to say, "Poor bastard," to go through all that and only to know that you're cold. I remember thinking, gosh, yes, even in the 50s, it's very grown up to have swear words. But they are not. They are not in the camera script or in the broadcast version. But yes, here we are. I mean, that set looks magnificent behind, doesn't it? Still the sort of smashed up house. Eugene Leahy here, Irish. And there's Neil Wilson. Sam Seeley from Spearhead from Space. But he was famous for being a policeman, Tub Barrel, in Dixon of Dock Green. So, I mean, I wonder if he even had the same uniform. But something I discovered that's not even on his IMDb or anything, that he was also a writer. He wrote as Neil Kingsley, but I found that in a piece of documentation somewhere. But that's I don't think that's online anywhere at the moment. So yeah, he was a member of the Writers Guild. Did I talk about him having a hard time on a later job? And I was told he was rather bullied by a director, which kind of knocked the wind out of him. Poor old Neil Wilson, which is a terrible, terrible shame. And yes, here we have everyone in the spaceship set, which of course was only represented by film last week because it was only in the one scene. How long did you say? This is Eugene Leahy, who is mentioned in Sybil Thorndike's autobiography because he was a long-standing member of her company in St. Joan, and he played the Bishop of Beauvais. I like the way that Hugh Kelly, when the police inspector says, you know, how do you do or something, he just sort of deadpans, "Pleasure." That's not in the script. It's Hugh Kelly, who I think is so good as Patterson. And I love his grubby coat that shows that he's been hard at work checking. But Patterson is completely honest with the police inspector here now, much to Quatermass's annoyance. He's trying to sort it out himself first. But Eugene Leahy's delivery is slightly sort of he's very sort of, I'm about 100 years old, but he is. Did I mention this last time? I did. I think I might have mentioned this in episode 1, but he's 70, which is too old to be a police inspector. Now, there were some professions after the war where people stayed on to work beyond retirement age because of a shortage of the correct age of men, because so many had been killed in World War II. but I still think 70 is slightly pushing it. And the character's comes across quite well on paper, and he's slightly sort of muffled here. And I had to do a lot of research because IMDb has Leahy then appearing in non-speaking parts in episodes of Maigret later, and you always have to worry about that because it just takes a name to be slightly mistyped in a script, or IMDb to be doing a bit of wishful thinking. So I didn't want to just put down that he was a non-speaking actor in his last TV credits, because that could have been wrong, and that's a bit of an ignominious ending to impose upon somebody when it's incorrect. But I scrolled through the 4 episodes of Maigret that he is alleged to have been in, and he's there with very thick glasses, looking very, very old. So maybe he was just rather keep his hand in than not. But so he's reduced to non-speaking background artist work by the end of his hugely illustrious career. I mean, he played Cochon in St. Joan for a good 20 years, and that's a hard part and a big part. I love this scene between Fuller Love and the news editor. I love the fact that his journalistic instinct means that he sniffs out that Quatermass is lying, but he has sympathy for him, and it also has the word fibs in it. That doesn't make him tell fibs. You've got to carry that off then and now. I think requires a certain ability with language when you're delivering it as an actor. But I think Paul Whitson-Jones does it absolutely well, and I love the way he sells it to his editor, and I love this speech he has about space. It's not space, the final frontier, but it's a new wilderness, pitch dark both day and night, empty and cold. It's beautiful. I love the fact that Fuller Love is here to give us, because Quatermass can't be too fancy. He's the man of science, and actually it's his job and everybody else's job. So they can't be too. It would seem slightly indulgent for them to suddenly get sort of wistful about the job that they're doing, and it would dilute the urgency of the problem that they have. But the fact that you can cut over to Fuller Love and have that, I think gives a slightly different character to the piece, and I love it. So I suspect that scene between Fuller Love and his editor will be that speech of Fuller Love's, which I really love. And I mean, I used to read that script book over and over. I remember taking it on a plane to go on holiday to visit my dad in Germany and reading it over and over and over. And I used to say those lines in my head, and I was privileged enough to say them out loud in Alexandra Palace. Stella Richman here. She's married to Alec Clunes, who later becomes connected with the role of Quatermass. I think slightly incorrectly in the way that history has written it up, but that will be in book 3. But yes, Stella Richman, who went on to be a head of LWT or head of drama at LWT. She had an amazing career, but here, as an actress, she is basically stroppy nurse. And I think one of her few lines is, "I shall have to report this." We had the fireman in episode 1 going, "I'm going to make a report about this." There's a character in Quatermass at the Pit whose final words are, "I must make a report." Nigel Kneale had disdain for people who wanted to make reports. I love this actor, Ian Collin, playing Detective Inspector Lomax. I don't think I put it in the book, but I spoke to Ian Collins' son, Peter Wetherell, who is a Mayfair estate agent, rather fancy, high-end, but he gave me some time on the phone. And he said that his dad had been sounded out about taking over from William Hartnell, who was a mate of his in Doctor Who, and that Ian Collin would have made Doctor Who even darker. But he's got a great connection with another famous monster, because Ian Collin is the man who took the photograph known as the surgeon's photograph of the Loch Ness Monster, because his father, Marmaduke Wetherill, Ian Collin was really called Ian Collin Wetherill, was a famous hoaxer and quite a character, and Ian was his son. But the reason that it's called the surgeon's photograph is because one of their party was a surgeon, and they reckoned they should give him the credit for it, because a surgeon would be more likely to be believed than if you called it the actor's photograph, because actors are known to be absolute charlatans and liars. So he has a wonderful connection with another monster, Ian Collin, and I think he's lovely. I think he has a beautiful dusky voice, and unlike Jack Warner, who's great in the film, who's a sort of dogged, sort of funny, sort of policeman. Policeman's lot is not a happy one. He's there's something much more elegant about Ian Collin, which I know was much more to Nigel Neal's taste, and I love the character of Lomax. And in fact, that's who John and Andy Murray thought I should play in the live version. And I wasn't sure, but no, I went for Full of Love in the end, and it meant we get Kevin McNally as Lomax, which is no bad thing. I remember watching this. He's got a line, hasn't he, where she starts crying and he says, "Don't stop," i.e., let it all out. But my mum, watching this, because I'd put it on and expect people to watch it, laughed because she thought he said, "Don't sob." No, he didn't say "Don't sob," Mum. He said "Don't stop," which is very sort of, proper British thing, saying you let it out. You don't have to be stoical all the time. I think Isabel Dean's stunningly beautiful and wonderful delivery that she has. But she does have to do a lot of this sort of staring far away acting. But she became a major TV star, and you can sort of see why. But I think female parts date much more than male roles in these sorts of programs. But I don't know, Neil wasn't wild about. Here we have the revelation that Caroon has come back and he's a shadow of his former self, and obviously he's stricken. And Judith has to confess to Quatermass that she's having an affair, and it's with Gordon Briscoe, who we've not met yet, but who is going to be another important member of the team. And I know Neil, when they were doing the remake, suggested that subplot maybe be cut, but I think it, just as the guilt is piled onto Quatermass because it was his invention, and it's more than just somebody he's employed. It's a friend and colleague who's gone up. They're all friends and colleagues who've gone up. To have it as Judith's husband adds pressure on her, of course, because that really helps those opening scenes in episode 1, that she's not just waiting for a colleague to come back, she's waiting for her husband. But then in episode 2, when we're given the revelation, but she'd been kind of cheating on him, that means she has a different kind of guilt, but she doesn't escape the guilt that casts a shadow over Quatermass's furrowed countenance. And I think that's very Neil, and I think that's very gloomy, because she was trying to, her and Gordon are both nice people, and we like them, and they're heroes for whom we root, but they aren't let off the hook in terms of feeling guilty. Sergeant Best has taken the fingerprints, which is nice because it leads us out of the previous scene, gives us a bit of a sense of urgency, and gives Quatermass an excuse to take Caroon under his wing. Suddenly he's not safe in the hospital, and the fact that Caroon, even when he's back, is not safe. There are various people that are interested in him. One, it gives us the impetus to take Caroon under Quatermass's care, which means we can have various scenes later on that are essential for the plot development. But it also propels Maurice Durant, interesting actor who's got one line, so you'll have to read about him in the book. But so Quatermass comes in, and his first proper encounter with Lomax and his doughty sidekick, Detective Sergeant Best, Frank Hawkins, who later had a regular role in early Z-Cars, played a lot of policemen, Frank Hawkins. But so Quatermass comes in very angry with Lomax because they've taken the fingerprints and they're treating Victor as a criminal, which they're not. But they're going through all of the protocol that's necessary. I suppose it seems a little quaint now that we've got these two Scotland Yard men investigating this, when you'd really have a specialist team these days. But in those days, dealing with the unknown, that's all you had. So you'd go to Scotland Yard, and they would have to learn as we do, which is again useful for the storytelling, but also it means we have a counterpoint with the otherworldly and the people of science who might be talking in language that we don't understand. We need sort of a pair of ordinary coppers, even though one of them is very elegant, but we need this pair of ordinary coppers to be a sort of prosaic counterpoint to all the strangeness that's going on, but also a kind of down to earth and pragmatic sort of headbutter with Quatermass, and the fact that I think in the script and in the development, Lomax is quite. Is quite terse and testy and at loggerheads with Quatermass. I think the fact that Ian Collin is so reasonable and the character has softened slightly in the development means that, again, Quatermass can't be too angry in a way because they're not doing anything unreasonable. And we have this wonderful revelation that that's some stock footage of the comet, which I've narrowed it down to when that might have been taken with the help of Charles Norton. It's one of the few film sequences here. But that idea that the spacesuits, they come, you have the inner linked section and then the outer section that goes on, and the fact that the link sections are still linked inside, that's a beautiful mystery. What's happened to these astronauts? The first thing we think, that they've been sucked out, is obviously not the case because they're still in their spacesuits. But then they couldn't even have got out of their spacesuits, so why aren't they in them? It's layering on the mystery. And it's brilliant, and it makes this more than man turns into monster. And here we have a reference to, these two journalists played by Patrick Westwood and Dominic Lafoe are this sort of funny chorus. But Lafoe's character, wasn't it? I think says, be a time to pick murder, be like pushing somebody off Mount Everest. Mount Everest was only conquered 6 weeks prior to this, so the reference to Mount Everest is a topical reference. I'm very sorry, sir, says Paddy Hayes as the airport security guy, who had no lines in the original, so he gets no credit here. He was a non-speaking artist who gets a line late in the day, but too late to get a credit. But I'm sure he'll have been happy to ring his mum and say, "But I'm going to say something." He was an actor and a stunt man. The people leaving the plane are the same people who watched the crash site 10 minutes earlier. The same extras go round and around and around. And I think Paddy Russell is amongst their number 2. So here we have Enid Lindsay, who's later in the Douglas Wilmer Sherlock Holmes, Mrs. Hudson, no less, as Louisa Green, wife of Charles Green, the character played by Peter Bathurst, who's the head of the mission, and John Glenn, whose voice we've heard as Dr. Gordon Briscoe. I love that exchange between Fulanov and Quatermass, because Quatermass has sort of said, I'm not going to help you, and he rather amusingly says, "Oh, I'm just here to watch the aeroplanes." I got a big laugh for that at Ali Pally, by the way. I was so pleased. And then, of course, at the end, and I love that pat he gives to the to his fellow reporter because he got the story. But then when Quatermass sort of and he lock eyes, he reassures the professor. He says, "I'm just here to watch the aeroplanes," i.e., I'm not going to be an awful journalist and repeat that woman's distress just to sell a few papers. It's a great moment between Quatermass and Fulanov, and it's a great piece of writing from Neil. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that a fly has landed on the monitor. He's slightly out of, I think he's in a darker space now, but he will pop up. He will keep popping up, the bastard. But I love this scene. This is a great piece of detective work from our sort of supporting factotum policeman, Detective Sergeant Best. He's there really just to sort of ask questions and do bits, but he gets his moment here where he spots, we've established that he's an excellent fingerprint taker, and he spots that there's a characteristic of the fingerprints that he's taken that is not Caroon's, doesn't match the folder with Caroon's vital statistics in, but it does match a distinctive central pocket loop in the file of one of the other men. He's got one of the other men's fingerprints. How on earth has that happened? Again, this is more than man into monster. This is something different. This is Neil's take on it, which is much more fascinating and philosophical and mysterious. I can see the fly now at the bottom of the screen, and here we have Caroon now taken to the British rocket group, and the beautifully voiced Dr. Briscoe, played by John Glenn, who had a history with Isabel Dean. They'd known each other beforehand, and she told me that she'd rather fallen in love with him, but he was, I mean, how that would have worked out is anybody's guess, because he was gay, but it's not unusual for marriages of those kinds to have taken place. But anyway, by this time she had married the playwright Bill Fairchild, so it was moot. But she told me that prior to that she had been rather in love with John Glenn, so any connection they might have probably didn't require too much acting. Glenn was ultimately, he partnered with another actor called David Enders, and they opened a restaurant together and became the chief hospitality wallers at the Chichester Festival Theatre. And he became rather celebrated as a restaurateur with his he and David's restaurant called Les Glands, which Les Glands it's a baby bird, isn't it? Anyway. Duncan Lamont does such a great job of doing this stricken acting, and I love this mysterious stock music that comes in. I've listed all of the music that features that they've hoiked from the BBC Graham's library. Now, this speech is interesting that Quatermass has here, which he delivers to camera whilst the fly is on the right of screen, distracting us. But this speech is chopped out of the script book. It's a helpful speech for us to feel some sympathy to Quatermass. He is a man who has the scars of regret all over him, and we learn later in Quatermass too that his wife has probably died, but he has a daughter in Quatermass too. But then in the Euston Quatermass we learn that she's died as well. But there he has that speech about 10 years ago I committed myself to land surveying in the tropics. At least then I would only have harmed myself. I think, in the film, anyone used to the Quatermass movies where Brian Donlevy says, "There's no room for human feelings in science, Judith," could see that obviously a guilt-ridden Quatermass is much more has much more a dramatic appeal for Neil, who I think enjoys us having a bit of sympathy and likes a sort of melancholy about his hero, who is fully aware that his striving for frontier breaking, his pioneering spirit, will always carry with it a great cost, even if not to himself. So she says to Gordon, "I'm staying," but presumably, spoilers, but Victor does not make it alive to the end of the serial. Presumably, her and Gordon can get it back together. So at least there's some happy ending to the ultimate demise of poor old Victor Caroon. So here we have, yes, the wife of Charles Green, Louisa, but we are told that Louisa and Charles she calls him Charlie and he calls her Lou, and so here Victor is saying, "I'm cold, Lou, I'm cold." Which is again another hint that things are not all they seem with Victor Caroon. Well, we know they're not all they seem, but Duncan Lamont does such a good job. I think his performance is key to the success of this, and James Swanton indeed was brilliant in our live version. But this is so sad. They have a kind of connection because there's a vestige of Charles Green there lurking within the avatar that looks like Victor Caroon, but is in fact the combined knowledge of all three, and that's a fantastic, fertile idea. Camera's not quite sure where to look there, is it? There's a few shots that are slightly out of focus. It's hard when you've got a 4-shot. but yeah, it's a compelling idea. Yeah, I think they do struggle with the blocking sometimes, and that's partially because the sets. I mean, sometimes they're not even three-walled, are they? I mean, I think the set in Lomax's office is basically a back window. Oh no, there's the door as well. But we have to be quite flat on a lot of these interior sets. Although at least there's a sense of size about this one, but that's why I think the camera sometimes struggles with who to alight on. And that three shot, it had sort of two people on the edge, and then someone in the foreground out of focus, and somebody in the background out of focus, which is a struggle. Bernard, you are afraid of something. Neil is great at that sort of thing. The sense of foreboding, the sense that whatever it is that is happening right now, and that helps. I think the sense of tenseness, the sense of creeping foreboding. Very. There's a lovely speech that she has here about scientists not being absent-minded, but Charlie being meticulous. But it's largely there to give them a chance, to give Reginald Tate and John Glenn and Duncan Lamont a chance to get from the set that they were on to the set that they are at, because this is live television, and frequently you could not start a scene with the people who'd left the previous scene, because they had to get from one end of the studio to the other, or at least get set up for the next set. And also because you would only have at the beginning of the scene probably one camera and another getting ready, because you probably have three cameras. Now this caused me so many problems. This was probably filmed in the grounds of Alexandra Palace on I think the third, maybe the second or third. I think the 3rd of July. And I was convinced these two men here were stock footage, but I wasn't sure. And 2 extras are listed for the filming at this time. So it could have been, did they? But I was like, no, because they were banks of instrument. And the whole reason you would use stock footage is to give yourself banks of instruments that we do not have available to us. And anyway, eventually I did track down the stock footage, and those men are on it. And it's from some of the V2 testing that was going on in the late 40s, I think, early 50s. So anyway, it's listed in the book. I'll tell you exactly what the stock footage is from. But so we have this footage from these 3 men, and the actors, Christopher Rhodes, Peter Bathurst, and Duncan Lamont are listed in the filming, but Enid Lindsay isn't, and yet she's there. So I'd got these 2 extras, Peter McCart and Paddy Ward, and I wasn't sure what they were. And I think I've narrowed it down to probably what they were doing, which is something in episode 4. But they're on the paperwork there resolutely, and you go, well, I've got to go with the paperwork. But Enid Lindsay is not. It took me ages to work out what he was saying there, Reichenheim. He says, I hope it's on an island with lots of pretty girls. I think it's very key that Reichenheim, the German character, is good fun now, because we have German spoken later, and that's important. That bit where he speaks in German is very important. But Neil's girlfriend, Judith Kerr, was German and had escaped from Germany, had escaped the Holocaust. So, but of course, a lot of German scientists were there helping us with our rockets. That was some of the sort of penance that they paid in the post-war situation. But he makes sure to paint Reichenheim as a really likeable character. We really do sort of miss not getting to know him, because he seems a lot of fun. And also because we're going to hear German shortly, and it is a sign that something is wrong. But that's playing so cleverly with all sorts of expectations, because German voices generally in entertainment of this time are the voices of the enemy. When you hear German spoken in movies taken around this time, they're largely war movies, and they're largely people threatening or up to no good, especially if they're speaking in their own language, where they're issuing threats or it's the sounds of battle or whatever. Tate does this very well. He's I feel so helplessly ignorant, and he doesn't know if what's going on with his friend, but he doesn't know if he's racked with guilt. He's just seen his friends who are missing alive again, and that film makes him remember, and the memory is really painful to him. But this is my favourite bit of the whole episode, where we've established, he has a line earlier, Reichenheim is speaking in German just to tease Victor because he knows he doesn't understand, and then minutes later we hear Victor speaking in German. absolutely brilliant. I mean, we've already had the hints about Charles Green, but now we have him speaking in the German of Reichenheim. And of course, German is a language that unsettles us at this time because it, as I say, the voice of the enemy in the war, which only ended 8 years earlier. Everyone watching pretty much will have fought in that war, certainly have memories of it. All these actors will have been involved in it. They all served, extraordinary. So Germany is still the voice of the enemy. Now that's not what Neil is about, because Neil's about to marry a German. So he's not engaging in sort of cheap shots or invoking them glibly. But what he's doing is he's playing with that idea of that accent. So he subverted it by saying, no, the German guy is on our side and we really like him and he's really friendly. But then when we hear the German voice coming out of Green, that's already dissonant because the guy who can't speak German speaks German. But it's playing with the fact that we've just got used to this language of the baddie being used for a goodie, and the fact that we're going, no, we're a bit more sophisticated. We're not as ambivalent towards the German language as we might be in this situation, because we know that we're coming from a much more sympathetic place. And then he uses it to unsettle. So he's playing upon those inbuilt things. He knows what lurks in the dark recesses of the mind. And in fact, that becomes key to the plot of Quatermass in the Pit. So it's deeply, deeply sophisticated stuff. It's a shame that scene has to be interrupted by, I think, a slightly late Murray Watson, and everyone has to sort of stand slightly awkwardly. But that's the last we see of Murray Watson as well, who goes on to become a fantastic actor, incapable of a bad performance. But he's not the best thing about the Quatermass experiment. But he was a lovely, lovely man. I had the pleasure of exchanging letters with him on several occasions, and I spoke to him on the phone a few times. He was so kind and so helpful. And I eventually went and visited him at his home. And what a pleasure that was. Why didn't I take a photograph of myself with Murray Watson? I don't know why I didn't do that at that time, but I didn't. Maybe I was going to come across as a professional. Bugger that now. And I love this scene. And look, we start on the scene of Patterson and Briscoe, because Quatermass and Lomax are making their way across the studio to be in place for now when the camera cuts to them. But they weren't there when the scene began. I love the way this scene is shot, but look at the way the focusing is. Patterson is not that far behind Briscoe, and yet he's completely out of focus, because that's the trouble with these cameras. But actually, him being out of focus really helps the shot. I think it's gorgeous. And it really focuses on Briscoe, who's looking at the jelly-like substance. And I think this could be really awful, a sort of histrionic outburst as the last thing that we've seen. But actually, Hugh Kelly is absolutely bang on, and the look that Tate gives him in the face of his panic, I think, is absolutely fabulous. And in comes Inhumanity, pouring into our ears as the last noise that we hear from the Quatermass experiment. That's it. That's part 2 of the Quatermass experiment. That's the end. Oh dear. Well, thanks the Quatermass experiment. And yes, and now we have, and I think it's Sylvia Peters. There were 2, weren't there? Mary Malcolm and Sylvia Peters. I'm pretty sure this is, or am I sure it's Mary Malcolm? I can't remember. Whichever one it is, I'm absolutely sure of it, and have now forgotten which one I decided I was absolutely sure it was. But you can see the next episode of the Quatermass experiment next Saturday evening at 8:45. And Mary Malcolm, who the Wire is based on Doctor Who's The Idiot's Lantern, does appear as herself. Well, her voice appears in episode 5 and episode 6. So there's a bit of verisimilitude where the BBC Ali Pali announcer plays herself in the Quatermass experiment itself. So anyway, I've got to choose my 5 favourite things. Well, my first one is easy, and I've got a feeling John knows that this is my favourite scene because we've done talks and we've presented the episodes a couple of times. The scene where Karun starts speaking in German, I think it absolutely sums up the sort of sense of menace. I think it's a brilliantly Nigel Neal idea. I went into detail during the episode of how I think it does clever things with our perception and sort of the innate prejudices is the wrong word, but instincts that the audience might have when hearing that language. But what Neil has already done to turn that on its head by creating a benign and even very, very likeable and funny figure out of the German character, whose presence also, points us to the time we are in, and it's a happy coincidence that he can use that real life in those real life situation, and those incidents to play to his strengths, because he can get the proper German from his wife, who can say exactly how it should be phrased and all of that. But to create an absolutely creepy and Neil's brilliant melding of the familiar with the unfamiliar, and that's it in its essence. Victor Karun is familiar to everybody there, and in fact Ludwig Reichenheim is familiar to everybody there, and we've met and established these characters, but then to have one of them speaking the words of the other, that's the best Doctor Who menaces are kids in a gas mask, crack in the wall, murderous telephone flex, taking things, giant maggots, taking things from real life, putting them in situations that we're not used to seeing them in, which has the familiar, therefore, in the unfamiliar, and then making it creepy. That's so much more effective than almost anything else in terms of scares and spooks and menace that aren't about shocks and jolts or viscera. And I just think it's beautiful, and it's really well done. Duncan Lamont does it well. I think all three actors that carry that scene off really well, and the timing of the music as well when it comes in, when he starts speaking in German. It's just brilliant. I think it's the best scene of them all in the whole of what exists of the Quatermass experiment. So definitely that is number one. Number two has got to be, I love Fuller Love's speech about what's space being pitch dark both day and night. I know I've already chosen, I think, Fuller Love, haven't I? But I really like the character, and so if I choose his speech, although then again I do also like the bit where he tells Quatermass, "I'm just here to watch the aeroplanes." So hold that thought, because that's two Fuller Love things, and we're going to have both of them. So what else can I choose? Let's see if there are other things I can choose to see if I get one or two Fuller Loves in my selection. Would two be too many? Would that seem like I've got a bit of a man crush on a character that I played? That is a bit of a worry, isn't it? No, because the reason I wanted to play him was because I loved him, and he's not in the film. He's such a good character, so he gets. So let's choose some of the other bits. I love the cliffhanger, and I think it's particularly strong that Hugh Kelly doesn't make Patterson histrionic, and because the actor actually never does a telly after this. I'd worried before I saw it. He's not an actor we know, so he might be very bad, and it could be a weakness because it's that sort of role, and actually he's great, and it's a wonderful cliffhanger, and because it's the last that we have of the Quatermass experiment as well. I think those final flickering images with the panic face of one character and the stoical but foreboding the face of Quatermass, our hero, full of foreboding, I think is a wonderful contrast, and it's just a great bit of sci-fi. What went on in here? What did it do to them? Whoa! Cracking, and the feeling of loss that we have as those images fade into nothing. So the cliffhanger, I'm trying to think, because John's very good on sort of what lines mean things and what references there are two other things. So, the Comet Jet is important because the Comet Jet was emblematic of new frontiers that were being crossed. You could fly to the other side of the world. So the fact it's in Australia has historical precedent. I think I discussed that in episode 1. And apologies for anything I've repeated from episode 1, but I did it a week or so ago, and sadly my brain is atrophying. And I've been a busy man. A lot's happened. But yes, so Australian testing of V2 rockets was what was going on. So it's a plausible setting, but also it means that we can invoke the comet, which is part of this brave new world of technology that Quatermass is exploiting in order to, do his experiment. And the comet actually was short-lived and a false dawn too. But it's so that is a very sort of interesting reflection of the times and a deliberate invocation of something that was emblematic of frontier breaking and technology improving. I love Inspector Lomax and the fingerprint scene. I love that. Is that going to be one of them? I think the line about perhaps it's murder, that would be like pushing somebody off Mount Everest again. That shows us it's another indication of the timeless quality of this series. This serial is in fact rooted in a lot of specifics to not only the year in which it was written, but the week in which it's being broadcast. Pretty much, all of this it's almost like Have I Got News for You? It's Drop the Dead Donkey. You've got this science fiction plot, and they're throwing in references to stuff that happened this week. And there's me invoking Drop the Dead Donkey as if it's a modern reference. For those of you that are young, Drop the Dead Donkey was a sitcom set in a newsroom, and you'd have the episode of the week, and what they very cleverly did was, they'd rehearse the sort of comedy story of the week or whatever, and then but then just before it went to camera, the night before broadcast, they'd throw in lines sort of on the floor referring to a news story of the day. So it seemed like everything that was happening at GlobeLink News was happening, as we were watching. So there, yeah, I've made a reference to something and then had to explain what it is, because even my modern references are very old. And God, I was videoing Drop the Dead Donkey when it was going out, as I was in between watching the Quatermass serials as the exciting teenager that I was. So I do like the fingerprint scene, and I like the fact that it's Sergeant Best, the sort of doughty sidekick sergeant character that gets to do a bit of the specialist investigating himself. It's always worth being a character in Neil's shows, because you always get something to do. The outside filming is very nice, and it's very economical, isn't it? They're just filmed against the sky. You don't actually see what they're standing on or what they're near or anything, because they aren't. They've made use of the fact that they're at the top of the hill at Alexandra Palace to show that you don't need to see anything in the background, and just bung in a bit of stock footage. But yeah, there's the scene with the inspector, isn't there, in the spaceship? There's the end of the scene at the celebration site. There's the scene in the hospital. No, so I think I've got my 5. So number 1 I gave you was the scene where he speaks in German. Number 2 is the cliffhanger. Number 3 I think is the discovery of the fingerprints, because that is the start, I think, isn't it, of the idea that this isn't, and I think this benefits us more as a modern audience, actually. You would think you're going for, he's been infected by an alien and he's turning into a blob. But Neil's already undermined that before it's become the cliche by going, he is not he is possibly they. And what's happened to the astronauts is something that we can't even quite conceive, but that later ends up making a strange sort of sense. What he's done is he's the plankton of the ether, the creature that just sort of seeps into them in outer space. It's like they go through a sort of oil slick, and he disassembles them. The creature disassembles them and then reassembles them all as one in order to create a host to acclimatize itself to life on Earth. That is so much more interesting than he's been infected and he's turning into an alien. There's a biological process there that has a purpose. But also the fact that it's not a creature that speaks or you can really converse with. I think is very Neil. Most of the aliens in Quatermass are really abstract, and we are nothing to them. And I think that's really compelling. That's more interesting than the Doctor Who thing of what I think Gareth Roberts' father described. Was it Gary Gillett's father described as squabbling rubber? Which I think it's Gary Gillett, isn't it? And that can sometimes be a painful problem with science fiction, where people have to have conversations with aliens, because if you make their dialogue too colloquial, it's just like, well, they just seem like a man off the street. But if you make them all Shakespearean, it can be a bit pompous. I fucking hate gold aliens in cloaks who speak boringly, and Neil generally tries to avoid that and goes, no, we can't converse with them. But they have different biology from us, and they have to either overcome or take over or alter that, or to do whatever it is they need to do. To the extent that in the very final Quatermass, it's just for it's just for a brief moment of, in the same way that we'd dab a bit of sherbet or whatever. And I think that is much more unsettling than something with a blue head that you have a conversation with, and it's very clever. It's very clever in that regard. And so part of what has happened is that the three bodies have been melded together, which gives us this new fingerprint. So I love that start of that particular aspect of the mystery, which comes key to the resolution of the whole story, because what remains of the three astronauts within that avatar becomes key to our salvation. In the end, humanity versus technology and the unknown. Our soul, if you like, you can go as far as that. But I love that it's Best, who we don't really know, but he's been introduced as, you think he's clearly just going to be the one that the inspector gets to talk to in order to tell their side of the story and go, yeah, I've interviewed him, Chief, or whatever. But actually, he gets his moment where he gets to do the bit of reasoning that leads us to that first conclusion. So I've chosen that just above. But I love the bit where Quatermass discovers that the outfits are still linked inside, and the look on Reginald Tate's face, and the fact that he slightly, as Best says, that shook him, and the fact that Lomax is so reasonable in light of that. Yeah, I'm going to choose that instead of the fingerprint. I love the fingerprint, but I'm going to choose that because we have various hints that it's all three men, but that's the start of what the hell has happened to these bodies. They didn't get out of these, and it's a great moment for Quatermass. It's a great moment to show that Lomax is not actually intransigent and unsympathetic. But these men are slightly working at cross purposes, and that's partially due to Quatermass putting his defences up, and it turns out he's wrong. Lomax is on his side, and so that's really good characterisation, because everybody's got a decent reason for being how they're being, but they're still at loggerheads, but without either of them being an arsehole, and I think that's really effective. I love the character of Lomax. So yes, no, I'm going to go for the scene where, and the look on Tate's face is brilliant when he puts his hand in and sees that and it's a great use of that thing that we've established about the suits being linked inside, and it suddenly becomes this thing of great terror. So yeah, sorry fingerprints, I'm going for the linked suit, the links inside the suit in that moment. Then I'm going to go for I'm just here to watch the aeroplanes, because I think it's a great line at the beginning to show full of love, just being light and cheerful to Quatermass, but then it comes back later as something that shows that he's actually deep and decent and kind, and it's a brilliant moment, and I love it. It's it's a bit of sort of unspoken camaraderie, the sort that's the sort of thing I go for. I'm not good at things where people cry or say they love each other, and I'm not really bothered about that, but a kind of unspoken sort of slightly male bond thing where you sort of say a thing without actually saying it, and you have a moment of understanding. That's what gets me the collywobbles, because it's unspoken. Because saying things is hard. So yes, I love that moment. It's just a really nice, deft piece of writing as well, that where the same line serves two different purposes, really, at the beginning and at the end of the scene, and it helps to establish that Full of Love is different from his sort of gossipy colleagues, and that he and Quatermass have a potential bond. So I could now throw in the fingerprints, but I'm gonna dare to repeat myself and choose a Full of Love moment again, because I do love the character and I do think he's really important to making this successful in serial form, because you need sort of extra characters who really bring something to proceedings and aren't just padding, and I think this would be poorer without the texture Full of Love brings to it. And I love that speech he has about space being pitch dark both day and night, empty and cold, and that's that whole scene that he has with the editor where he's cottoned on to the fact that Quatermass is lying, but he's sympathetic, but it means that the journalist has the scent, and I think it again, that works on a number of levels, in terms of the commentary, in terms of the texture of the piece, in terms of the role that Full of Love plays, and in terms of Neil's approach, his kindness towards his characters and the kindness exhibited by his characters when they, and their intuition, which makes us warm to them. So yes, those are the 5 things: the German scene, the cliffhanger, the linked suit, Full of Love's I'm just here to watch the aeroplanes, and then the Full of Love scene between him and the news editor where they discuss Quatermass stalling desperately. It's got the word fibs, and the line is, granted he's been through days of frightful strain, finds he's made history and lost 2 valued friends in the process, but that doesn't make him tell fibs. You couldn't have that line today because it's got a couple of real 50s, is frightful and fibs, and yet it kind of works and is kind of glorious and is in no way naff. I love it. So those are my 5 things. What has John Deere, producer of the Quatermass Experiment Live, writer on Nigel Neal, co-host and founder of the Bergcast podcast. If you've enjoyed this, there is plenty of Quatermass goodness in podcast form over at Bergcast, where John and various cohorts, his latest co-host is Andy Murray, but there's loads of people on, including me, in an early edition, go all through the Quatermass oeuvre and into other Nigel Neal stuff. And in fact, the latest episode, as I record this, is an interview with none other than Brian Cox. Brian Cox's son, Alan Cox, was in our live version of the Quatermass Experiment, but the mighty Brian Cox from Succession and everything else talks about appearing in the year of the Sex Olympics, and his memories are absolutely fantastic, and his enthusiasm for the subject is infectious, and the fact that they've got him on that podcast is a testament to them, and he enters in it very, very gamely, and it's a brilliant listen. So head over to Bergcast, but not before you've heard John Deere's 5 things about the Quatermass Experiment. Let's see if we tally. They're peculiar to this episode.
The cruel fate of having the InVision continuity announcer tell us when we can watch the next episode of the Quatermass Experiment, but we can't. That always gets me. That always annoys me. It always fills me with hope, even though beyond time travel, I know I can't ever see that episode. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed that, and here are my 5 favourite things about persons reported missing. First is Full of Love scene with Jacko. This is a great illustrative way that Neil does of moving the story on in an emotional sense rather than just plot development, where Full of Love's talking about he can see that Quatermass is lying, and he can see Quatermass doesn't want to lie, and he can see that Quatermass is covering something that's too terrible for him to contemplate. Full of Love is the heart of the Quatermass Experiment. And in many ways, we don't really have a conventional hero as we understood them in terms of an action hero, of the leading man. Quatermass is quite a taciturn, emotionally distant character. So Full of Love takes a lot of the emotional journey that people want to go on as to why they should care, and both with the scene, mainly with the scene with Jacko, but it also continues later on to the scene with Quatermass at the airport. And it's a great example both of Neil having announced to have a different character, and in many ways, a different strand of the plot, to make the viewer understand why they should care emotionally at the same time that the meat is being served by the predominant plot of Quatermass and what's happening to Karun, and the very subtle, almost underplayed nature of Paul Whitson-Jones, which, given if you know Paul Whitson-Jones's at least Doctor Who career, isn't something necessarily you think of when you think of him as well. But I think that's both delightfully done, an important hook in the story, and a good example of what Neil brings as a dramatist. That's my first favourite thing.
And I think John very cleverly got two of my favourite things in his one favourite thing, and I think it's partially because I chose Full of Love in episode 1 as well, didn't I? So I think I wanted to nail down specifics, and as a result I nailed down 2 specifics, which used up 2 of my choices. So that was bad gameplay from me, but it doesn't matter. I don't mind saying I love James Full of Love twice in one episode, because I do love both of those scenes, and for slightly different reasons, although John did it was very clever in the way that he sort of rolled them into one having the same sort of purpose. But and I'm glad he chose he specified the bit about Full of Love knowing that Quatermass was lying and being sympathetic about it, because I do think that is a really nice and deft character touch, because he could have just been the journalist on a mission who goes, I wasn't born yesterday, I know he was lying, god damn it, Jacko, I'm on the case, slug of whiskey, I don't play by no rules. But instead he's a much more interesting character than that. But that's put me at a disadvantage, because although I get 1 point, I've essentially got 1 point out of 2 choices, which doesn't help me in the game. But the game is not the thing really in this. It's more the approach to the game, the final result. Well, it's the taking part. It's not the winning. Let's see what John's second choice is.
My second favourite thing is Quatermass saying, nearly 30 years ago, I nearly decided to give it all up and do land surveying in the tropics. That at least would have harmed only myself. That's a killingly funny line from the most morose character that's supposed to be the main character. Cheer up, mate. The idea that he sees anything through this absolute hangdog lens of negativity, and he's like, obviously he's been stressed for the reasons we know. Both the rocket's late, now a disaster has happened, but from the moment we've seen him, he's just been depressed. And then to think I should have given this up, and in 1923, when I had the chance to, instead of what I am now, which is presumably the most eminent rocket scientist in the UK, if not even the world, could have just been land surveying the tropics, but also the feeling that it would have ended in disaster. But because it's just him, only he would have been affected by it. I find that really funny. The idea of I wish I'd done this. I wish my part of life had taken a different path. Mind you, that would have been a disaster as well. It's just a wonderfully British way of dealing with it. The worst thing now is I've involved other people. I'm not sure in a way that was the plot, but it's a beautiful piece. I think of characterization. Again, going back to my first point, a very different type, a very British type of hero for this for this thriller. And when you either as you know it as a science fiction serial or a thriller for television in 6 parts, it's interesting to have this deeply flawed character as your lead, as your hope, and as we know later, he will come through. But I think that's a lovely little piece of morose characterization, and it makes me laugh.
It's funny. It doesn't make me laugh, although I do like it. Does now that John has put it like that. I've always liked it as I think in my head I was going to choose that, and then I forgot about it, even though I did talk about it during the episode. I should have chosen that instead of one of the Full of Love things, because I do think it's a key moment, especially as it's absent, as I say, from the script book. But it's a key moment. I've used it in clips. I used it in something I did for Radio 4 Extra, and in fact I've used it in the video that heralds the book launch to show that Quatermass is not the Quatermass of Brian Donlevy in the films, but that Neil's character is a troubled, a tortured soul. He embodies the big issue with scientific breakthroughs, and that they come with a cost, and that big difficulty that a moral character must wrestle with, in that when you take a risk, you don't just risk yourself, and that progress is bought on. Progress instigates change, but change is not always. All the changes our bodies go through are not painless. They are painful processes. More metamorphose, as we see with Victor Carroon, comes at a cost. But so scientific progress, you break barriers, don't you? But break means you break things. And Quatermass is always painfully aware of this, and I like the fact that he's a slightly melancholy hero. That appeals to me, and but he is, the way that John characterizes it, he is a bit like Eeyore, isn't he? Yeah, he sort of go, oh well, yeah, I could have. See, well, if I hadn't done the rocket group in 1950, no one would have died. In 1951, no one died. 1952, no one died. 1953, there was the bit with the rocket. In 1955, there was that bit with the moon project. In 1958, 59, there was that bit with the hole in Knightsbridge. But yeah, he's sort of. If I had done land surveying in the tropics, I'd have probably burnt down the rainforest myself. He does seem resigned to the fact that wherever he goes, he's going to leave dust and despair in his wake. But Tate does it very well, and as I say, it's an important window into the soul of the character, which shows that all the science fiction shenanigans aren't just about being earth-shattering, because sometimes we can get, we are then distanced from that. If the world being destroyed, it's spectacular and it's exciting. But if we see something weighing heavy on an individual, that kind of involves us more and engages us on an emotional level. So it's important that this breakthrough in science fiction had that important human content, which, remember, a lot of even really good sci-fi B movies at the time that we love and that endure to this day don't actually have the sort of humanity to them. If you look at something as brilliant as the Thing from Another World, which is full of characters, it's got so many speaking parts in it, but we don't ever feel sort of emotionally invested in them particularly, because stuff didn't really do that at that time. But this does. The Quatermass experiment does, and Neil does. So it's a great scene. I love that bit, but probably for different. I'm not as amused by it as John is, but I do like his take on it. And if I thought about it, I should have taken that. So I should now be 2 points ahead, but it's 1-1 going into thing number 3.
My third favourite thing in Persons Reported Missing is Carroon speaking German. Now, I know that viewed through modern eyes, the fact it's foreshadowed almost immediately beforehand by Briscoe saying Carroon can't speak German could look a bit naive, but we have to try and transport ourselves back to the naivety of what a television audience would have been like in 1953, and that doesn't really matter. So the revelation that he can't speak German, and then he can answer technical questions on the gimbal system in German. I noticed there isn't a German term for gimbal system, which is handy when doing the translation as to give you a hook. But it's genuinely chilling. And then we have a bit of one with Best and the fingerprints. But it's a chilling piece of foreshadowing when you go, what is that? The German guy is missing. He can speak German. You've had the scene where he recognised Green's wife, and you're just starting to piece together that something incredible has just happened, and really not in a good way, and that is quite chilling.
Yay! He chose the German scene. Yes. It's interesting. He didn't allude then to the fact that I think I've made it known that that's my favourite scene. So I don't know if he knew that he was choosing something that I was going to choose, but did so anyway, or whether he'd forgotten. But anyway, it is a brilliant scene. I think it's quite artfully dropped into the film, with Briscoe saying, Reichenheim is teasing Victor. I think that kind of works. It doesn't seem to me like Chekhov's German sentence, but maybe I'm just you look at the things you love with you don't notice their love handles, or what, I don't know what a love handle is, but I think it's a love handle. Isn't that a fold of skin? Is that a love? Let's not get into, but you know what I'm saying. You Quatermass and the love handles. You know what I'm saying. You tend to the things that you don't see the faults in the things that you love, unless you're a Doctor Who fan, when you see all the faults in the thing that you're supposed to love. But you know what I mean. But I'm gonna now. John's very good at he's very good at business and stuff, and if you say something that he disagrees with, he's very good, because he's got the art of negotiation about him, and he'll say, yeah, I just want to push back on you with that, and it's lovely when somebody, because you go, oh, okay, you're disagreeing with me, but you're doing it very politely, which has made me stop getting defensive, and it means you have an interesting conversation. It's very clever. But I'm going to push back on John with that and say that I think that it's quite artfully rendered, the setup of the German, and the fact that Victor doesn't understand, because he doesn't say Victor doesn't speak German. He says he's teasing Victor because he knew he wouldn't understand. I think that seems characterful to me, and it's happening when loads of other stuff's going on. When we're seeing one of the rare filmed sequences, when we're seeing the missing characters as themselves, so we're getting to know them, not just in reported speech. I think no, I'm pushing back, John. I'm pushing back, but nonetheless, we are in accord. So it's 2-1 to me. Let's see what John chooses for number 4.
Fourth favourite thing, which again is connected to the previous one only in the sense of it, we have to take into account how the audience would have perceived things at the time, is the fact that, as in many ways we're watching as we understand it, a science fiction series. At the time, it's a thriller. It's mass audience event television, but nevertheless, it involves people at the forefront of an alien invasion, and yet it's done like a police procedural, because that's something the audience would be familiar with. If it was NASA, and the audience comes back, if it's something like the film Life, and it ends with an infected crew returning to Earth, you wouldn't get the local constabulary to investigate. The stakes would be seen as higher. But here and now, we have a situation where we're surreptitiously taking fingerprints from the astronauts. I'm not entirely sure why. I know dramatically we then get Best being able to see that they have amalgamated different fingerprints. But the idea of the sort of charming naivety that you would have an investigation from an inspector from Scotland Yard, rather than this being dealt with by the upper echelons of the British government. But this is something that potentially either the audience isn't ready for, or wouldn't make as much sense in connection with what's going on, that they wouldn't potentially understand. Now we, looking back now, see this perfectly, that we have that advantage of over 70 years of history. But it seems so off kilter now to assume that this could ever be a police procedural until you put yourself into the position of a viewer in 1953, which looks like a really, really different way of doing it, and while giving Quatermass somebody else to talk to, Lomax and Best can have have their scenes, which expands the dialogue, which expands the world in which we're operating, which gives more material for the writing, etc. It just seems as a very different way of doing it, and I find that quite interesting, and would be interested now that if you put back something into, arriving, into, if it arrived in Penzance, would Devon and Cornwall police be on, or would the Met still be seen as the primary go-to? In many ways, it sometimes reminds me of where you'll get a sort of 50s B movie site in America, and something will land in Hicksville, and the local sheriff will have to investigate, and that will be seen almost as a comedy thing. But here, it's deadly serious. They're doing what they think they would do, and I find that very interesting.
Yes, it is. It's the big barrier, actually, in terms of if you were to remake it in the modern day, the idea that Scotland Yard would get co-opted into what would be a specialist investigation by specialist government people. I mean, I don't know what the setup would have been in the 1950s if there would have been a department for space investigations, especially as, I mean, Quatermass has at least got government sanction to do what he's doing. It's not like it's not like he's done a sort of clandestine rocket launch. But how many departments were there in government that would have investigating science under their purview? But nonetheless, yes, it does seem very odd that you get. And I think the Quatermass rocket has crash landed in Birmingham. No, in Wolverhampton. Yes. Oh, I'll get the West Midlands Serious Crime Squad on the case. Oops. But yes, but it does as I say, yes. So now, if you were to remake it, because you need those scenes with Quatermass and Lomax, you need that relationship. And as I say, I'm really happy. It's a much kinder and more sympathetic relationship than it was in most stages of its development. And because I like the rapport that they have, and it's sometimes a bit boring if you've just got obstinate heads of different departments shouting at each other. I much prefer the fact that they're all trying to do the same thing, but from their own different approaches and perspectives and points of view. And as John says, it's very useful in having the different sets of characters. But it also, if it had been a big government department of suited and booted people and people in hazmat suits and people that knew what they were doing kind of thing, it wouldn't help tell the story in the way that it needs to, because the fact that, I think he even says, doesn't he, I'm playing catch up here, the fact that the guys in charge of finding out what went on wrong in terms of their expertise, that they're investigators, they still need filling in on all the stuff that we as lay people would need. And also it gives us that contrast between the otherworldly and the people. Otherwise it's conversations between everybody who knows what's going on, and we feel slightly excluded. So the policemen are kind of way in, and they are. And Neil thrives on juxtaposing the ordinary with the extraordinary, and so having two policemen who are our sort of staple of thriller drama, as John puts it, and it is called A Thriller in 6 Parts by Nigel Neal. It's it has the thriller template as its storytelling. So of course the thriller is going to be investigated by people who usually investigate thrillers, the police. It's just that this one is from somewhat outside of their jurisdiction. But that means that then we as the audience need to get filled in, perhaps slightly more artfully than we are in episode 1 when Blaker is told rather on the nose how the rocket works. But even though, as Andy alluded to in part 1, that is still done rather well and with a nod to character. So yeah, good. I mean, I love the characters of Best and Lomax. They get some great business and interactions later on, but I didn't really choose that. So it's 2-2 going into the final thing. So if John chooses the same as something I've chosen, the odds are slightly unlikely now, I think. It means I win, an unusual situation for Happy Times and Places. Or, as they were assured halfway through episode 6 of the Quatermass experiment, after a technical failure, normal service will be resumed when I lose Happy Times and Places. Let's see what John's final thing is.
And my final favourite thing is the cliffhanger. Not least of which because when I first saw it, I had to look up the word colloidal, And now I use it in such a way that suggests everyone should know what it means, but that's me. In many ways, this builds on the first cliffhanger, which is going into the rocket and seeing that there's no one there other than Karun. Now we have Patterson investigating, as he has been all episode, the control room, and then finding whatever it is all over the walls, as in centrifugal force has burst it out. And his passion scream, which again foreshadows the journey Patterson will go on over the course of the next 4 episodes, screaming, what went on here? What did it do to them? We've pieced together something that's suggesting Karun has aspects of both Green and Reichenheim. So something incredible, as I said before, must have happened. And now this substance is all over the control room. But we have no hook, we have no understanding, we have no, smoking gun. It's just a substance we don't understand, and a passion cry, what went on here? What did it do to them? That's chilling, and we never get that resolution. That's the last we see of this. We can read, we can reinterpret, but we'll never see as it was originally done. But it's a brilliant place to go out. I just wish we could have had more.
Oh, I agree, John. I mean, my joy at victory, victory, sweet victory. I won. I chose 3 of the same things, 3 out of 5. That is a victory for me. But victory is bittersweet. Oh, if only I'd done Happy Times and Places whilst land surveying in the tropics. At least then I could have enjoyed my victory. Because yes, the rest is silence. But until very recently, we didn't even have many pictures of the later episodes. But I like to think I've helped with that one a little bit. But buy my book, by the way, if you don't know to what I allude. But nonetheless, those performances, some of those amazing scenes coming up, particularly I think the stuff in Westminster Abbey and the showdowns in the final episode. There's some absolutely extraordinary stuff there, and the various bits of that we keep coming back to Karun as he sort of atrophies and as his humanity is eventually succumbs to the onslaught of the bodily invasion to which he ultimately that ultimately consumes him. Oh, so much stuff there, and some brilliant scenes of dialogue and some brilliant scenes of character. Oh, the return of Miss Wilde, the old lady. Oh gosh, all gone. There's a funny film. There's a bad cinema film, which is hilarious. It's so ahead of its time. So much to come in the Quatermass experiment that we cannot see. But the meta thing of having the monster revealed on television, and then Quatermass getting a brilliant 2 speeches. One, he apologises to the nation. He said, I'm really sorry, I've probably killed you all. And then he appeals to the humanity within the creature, and it is that humanity that wins in the end. Amazing stuff, whilst a massive vegetation gets into the very fabric of Westminster Abbey and threatens to destroy the world. And panic is caused. It creates, to quote the title of episode 6, a state of emergency. Oh, all that, and you've got Wilfrid Bramble as a drunk. You've got Karun escaping after being kidnapped by gangsters. You've got all sorts of. You've got the desiccation and destruction of a load of birds out on St James's Park. Oh, sorry, that was me getting a text message from Katie Manning. I was going to say nothing. I thought, damn it, I'm going to say that. Sorry. So, yes, how sad, but he's right. The cliffhanger is brilliant, and I think Hugh Kelly does it well. And colloidal that's a liquid in which other bits of particles are in, doesn't it? It's a sort of little particles suspended in a liquid or in a substance, something like that. And it's the fact, and I didn't allude to this, and it comes, they sort of dwell on it a bit more in the next episode, when one of the reasons Patterson is so stressed out is he goes, I've been in here all night, basically surrounded by this ick, whatever it is, that has spread into that's sort of clogging up the workings and the sort of internal skeleton of the rocket itself, and is basically surrounding them as they're standing in it, which is a pretty grim concept. So again, he's very good at making this stuff feel sort of visceral and menacing and unsettling. It's glorious stuff. I so wish we could see the rest of it, but we never will. We never will. They flickered once, those images. I mean, 21 years before I was born, those images flickered for the last time. Those words were spoken for the last time. Those actors congregated together for the last time, for the one and only occasion they were going to perform each episode of that serial that is now flying out into space somewhere, but never to return. We can't pick up those pictures. So thank you for joining me for the Quatermass experiment. There is a bit more left on John's audio file, so let's see what else he has to say. But maybe he's plugging his podcast, I do hope so, because it's marvellous, but he will put it in better words than I. So one more word from John dear, and then I'll be back to say cheerio.
So those are my 5 favourite things. I'm interested to hear what yours are, and if indeed you won. I think that would be quite appropriate for something that's celebrating your book. I won't plug anything because I think that's particularly appropriate on something that's about essentially a big plug for your book, and as it should be. Oh, safe to say that we'll both be on the Blu-ray of Hammer's The Quatermass Experiment, which comes out in June, doesn't it? So I'm sure we'll look forward to seeing that when it does. Thank you very much for having me on, Toby. It's always a pleasure. Thank you once again for being always so supportive on anything I've worked on with you. It's always been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday week, which will be the 19th of May, which I'm sure will be a very happy time and place. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John. I'm very fond of John, and he's been very, very helpful. And yes, I mean, as I say, I probably speak to and or text John every day because we like the same things and we get on and we have fun. So, of course, he was going to be on this, and he's written a lovely afterword for my book, The Quatermass Experiment, which is published now by 10 Acre Films. So I hope this has whetted your appetite for that, or accompanies it, or gives you the last push if you were wondering whether to buy it or not. John and I are on the Hammer release of The Quatermass Experiment, and on the very morning that I am recording this, it has been announced, we knew this but we couldn't tell anybody, that we are also on the Hammer release of Quatermass 2, the film. I've done the second part of a documentary about Nigel Neal. I'm also on a documentary talking about Quatermass itself, and looks like they've done a little extra feature about Brian Donlevy's interpretation of the role, and I think I'm on something else as well. I've done something else on it too. Yeah, I've done so. I'm all over it like a rash. It's like I've infected it and have now spread my tendrils throughout, changing it's very whatever. I'm on Quatermass 2, and it's a great movie, and it'll be another brilliant package from Hammer, and it's limited edition. So, but it's got the TV serial on as well. So, yeah. Get yourselves the Hammer box set of Quatermass 2, which has been announced hot on the heels of the imminent release of the Quatermass Experiment, or with a big X, of the film. But we've been talking today about episode 2, the last existing episode of the Quatermass Experiment. I hope you've enjoyed hearing all about it, and whatever went on, those final episodes, whatever went on in them, and what it did to, well, we know what it did to them. It shocked the nation and changed the shape of television. But exactly what went on, we'll never know. And we can't see the next episode of the Quatermass Experiment next Saturday evening, or indeed ever again. But maybe that's part of their magic. But anyway, they always take me to a very happy time and place, and I hope you've enjoyed your sabbatical away from Doctor Who, the Whoniverse, into the Quaterverse. Well, there we go. That's the repackaged material, and now for the bonus goodies of my favourite things about episodes 3, 4, 5 and 6 of the Quatermass experiment, and we'll never know if they're any good or not, because we'll never see them because they were never recorded. But for episode 3, well, I would like to choose a bit that potentially has a possibility of turning up. It's one of the few bits of the Quatermass experiment that was recorded on film, which is the scene in the spaceship featuring the 3 astronauts and the flashback that the characters in the programme don't see. It is being we hear it, and it is suggested to us via flashback, but we at the audience actually get a look in to see what happened, and we see the really important characters of the 3 astronauts who are sort of gone by the time that the program starts. But because they're well drawn, Reichenheim is funny. You know, Victor is a sort of young and handsome, and keen and funny, and not the sort of pale simulacrum of him that we see inhabiting the rest of the episodes. And indeed, you know, it's an avatar that is inhabited by whatever intelligence has squashed the 3 men together. And we get the moment where Charles Green's arm vanishes, and the inside of his spacesuit sort of crumples, and Reichenheim has that horrible line of "Victor, I can't see," suggesting that, you know, something is happening to him inside his spacesuit. On the paper, it's a really rather terrifying experience, and because it was done on film, there could well be really good sort of well done spacey stuff, and it will have looked a cut above in terms of quality and things, the stuff that surrounded it, giving it its own sort of sheen. And Cartier was an excellent director on film. I also like the fact that Nigel Neal wasn't taking any photos of that session, and yet a photo of the 3 astronauts and Rudolph Cartier, the producer, turned up on Alamy some years ago. I hadn't known of its existence, and I think Steve Roberts sent me a PM going, "Have you seen this?" It's vanished again now from the UK. You can find it if you're clever with your searches, but it's only now a thumbnail version of it. I think we looked into to purchasing it for the book, but you know, I think it would have eaten the budget of the book, and it is out there. But it's great, isn't it, that one of the sessions that Nigel Neal wasn't photographing, somebody else took one. I'm sure somebody else took loads, but only that one has slipped through, unless there are negatives somewhere. That's what I love about this stuff. It might be that my book becomes out of date as somebody finds in an archive a load of negatives marked Quatermass experiment space scene photographs, or you know, yes, the film of that turns up. I mean, it's really unlikely that the film will turn up, but it is conceivable, in the same way that another thing that could have been chosen for episode 3 is the previous Leons. That is conceivable. I'm sure I've talked about that though in the 50 minutes you've just listened to, which I haven't listened back to because I don't like listening to myself, because it would make me physically sick. But Toby, you like the sound of your own voice. Can't you tell the amount you're talking? That's different. Sorry. Episode 4, the no-brainer, is another pre-filmed sequence. Actually, it is the sequence of the horror movie, the space science fiction horror movie Planet of Dragons, which is so brilliantly written. It's so ahead of its time in its spoof of terrible B movies, and I'm swooning now. It's got and when we did it as part of the live production that John Deere produced, that we did at Alexandra Palace, my old mate Adam Riches, who I waited on tables with years ago and is now one of the leading live comedy performers in the country. He's won the top award at Edinburgh. He's brilliant, Adam. He did his own genius shows. He's got his own following that he's cultivated with his absolute madness. And he said to me, "Oh, well, look, if there's anything for me in it, I'll come and do it." And he'd moved out of London, so he had to travel in to do it. And he he played the space captain, and he was so funny. And actually, that was a last minute when we shifted the casting, because Adam's a fine straight actor, and I hadn't really considered those two parts as being particularly important, because the space girl and the space lieutenant, because they're just characters on a screen. But actually, as part of the live show, they were really, really important, and they really sold that. And it was, but the writing by Nigel Kneale, it's caustic, and it makes this really bad science fiction movie, but it's really, really well done. It's a really funny piece of writing, and I think well ahead of its time. So yeah, the cinema film, which again could also turn up, that was filmed, I can't remember now, I think it was filmed the same day as there were certainly a couple of days filming where those scenes were done before anything else. Those actors were cast earlier than everybody else. In fact, the two actors playing the space lieutenant and the and the space girl and actually the Green Reichenheim, Peter Bathurst and Christopher Rhodes, were all able to watch the Quatermass experiment if they had tellies. There was no guarantee of that, because they'd filmed their contribution in advance. I can't remember which order it went in, though. I've got a feeling the 3D film was the very first thing filmed, but I could be wrong. Might be the scenes in the spaceship. Doesn't matter. It's in the book. That's the problem. You see, when you write a book, you go, I've written it down. I don't need to remember it now because it's in the book. And if I need to check, I can check in my own book. And it's like, well, I'm not looking up something somebody else. I've put it there. Maybe is that an age thing, or is that a modern age thing where we can just check something on Wikipedia, so we don't need to retain knowledge in the way that we once did? And I was very good at it. It was my only skill. While other people were running around sports pitches, I was remembering the names of actors in things. Now you've got bloody IMDb. But anyway, that's full of mistakes, as my forthcoming book on Quatermass 2 will prove. My favourite thing about episode 5 is, of course, the live broadcast within the live broadcast. The idea that in the cliffhanger, Nigel Kneale absolutely brilliantly decides that the way that the nation in the fictional world of the Quatermass experiment will find out about the alien threat to Earth is through a live television broadcast from the BBC, which of course the real audience in the real world are watching at home right now. And I just think that's ingenious, and the fact that he set it at Westminster Abbey, which was familiar to television viewers, because most people watching the Quatermass experiment had watched the coronation at Westminster Abbey, and in fact that had been the reason a lot of people had got their televisions in the first place. So it was very associated with the medium, and was the site of the most important thing to have been broadcast on the medium up until that point. So there's all sorts of brilliant. They're actually really quite hot on current affairs in the Quaterverse. So it works for so many different brilliant reasons there. My favourite thing about episode 6 is the fact, I was going to say the technical breakdown, because that carries on from that. There was a technical breakdown in episode 6. And there's been a technical breakdown in the fiction of episode 6. So reality really helped the fiction. And I'm sorry if I've said some of this in the previous part of the broadcast that I recorded, a couple of year ago maybe. And so the realities of live broadcast actually helped in a way with making the storytelling meta before such a thing was even desired. I could have also mentioned the fact that they take a bow at the end, and I'm pretty sure I proved this in the book, even though I wasn't initially sure. They take a bow at the end. The actors take a bow at the end because it's the sort of last flourish of theatre in the medium of television before it upsticks and floats away from the art form in which it was initially rooted, and that Quatermass experiment was such a part of its sort of dissevering from. But dissever is a word that's actually used in episode 6 in my favourite moment, which is the fact that instead of blowing the creature up, as he does in the film, electrocuting the creature, in this, Quatermass talks the monster to death. And that might sound a bit trite and a bit boring and a bit anticlimactic, but I don't think it is. One, because Reginald Tate was such a very good actor, and Nigel Neal recalled him doing this final speech really well, and that he looked knackered by the end of it. But it's the fact that through all, science fiction often loses sight of humanity if it's not careful, and the very best science fiction keeps us in touch with the wants, desires, needs, aberrations of humanity, and the best science fiction is often told at its core through character. I mean, Aliens is an action-adventure, but its characters are what really keeps you invested. That's the other show that's celebrating today. And the whole idea of humanity being subsumed by this nebulous intelligence out there, and yet it is those vestiges of humanity that make the creature such a horrible parody of a person, which makes Victor Carroon quite an unsettling presence. But those very remnants of humanity that are the key to saving mankind is really, really important. We forget our own humanity at our peril. For all that Neil is a doom monger, and for all that he can be quite caustic about characters and quite ungenerous about people, particularly petty bureaucracy, at its heart, this is a story of redemption through the importance of that essence of humanity that runs through us all. So those are my 4 favourite things about the missing episodes of the Quatermass Experiment. I could have also mentioned perhaps one of my favourite things about them is the fact that we can't see them, because in a sense it's the hope that keeps you alive. I'm sure still love the Quatermass Experiment if I could see it all, and a big part of me is very upset and angry and frustrated that I can't, but I also know that sometimes not having what we want is, again, what sort of keeps us human, and is what keeps us striving, and is, the fact that something is unknown. The Quatermass Experiment is about seeking out the unknown, and our quest to find the truths about things we might not even possibly be able to. That's why those astronauts went into space, to find the truth about something vast and unknowable. And I'm not comparing myself to an astronaut, but I do like the act of trying to find out what could have happened in those episodes that we cannot see. But the fact that all the best I can do is surmise, the best I can do is put bits of evidence together. And sometimes in the book I go, well, there's this piece of evidence and there's this piece of evidence, which could mean this, but this means that might not be the case. So the best we can think is possibly this, but I don't know. And I quite like that. And actually there are mysteries of that kind about surviving instalments too, as you'll discover if you read my books on Quatermass 2 and Quatermass in the Pit. But also the next book will have an equal amount of surmising, because the creature, that excellent play, is also lost and unknown, like the abominable snowman that they are seeking. So the unknown, I think, is really important in some of the things that we do and we love, and our enjoyment of archive telly. Anyway, I hope this has been a suitable, if largely repackaged, celebration of the great Quatermass Experiment. I continue to be grateful to John Deere, who I was talking to today, and we were reminiscing about the live Quatermass Experiment that we did at Alexandra Palace, which is still one of the best days of my life, professionally and personally. I used to read those script books and rehearse saying the lines out loud. I never dreamed I'd get the opportunity to do that in front of a willing audience in the very place it was made, with a cast of that caliber. And I promise I am working very hard on books 2 and 3 and beyond, and I'm really grateful for all the support I've had in those endeavours. And when the books came out, I had a couple of launches, one at the BFI. When the book came out, I had a launch at the BFI and a launch at 53.2 in Manchester. I was interviewed by Lisa McMullen from the BFI and Abby Cook from Blue Peter, and they were well attended, and I know a lot of the listeners are people who supported those, and the whole process was really touching. And so thanks for listening. I look forward to doing this again with Quatermass 2 when I can do the whole thing. I'm going to need a bigger guest roster. Oh, no. And I'm going to need a bigger podcast. But that is all to come. I've got to finish the bloody book first. But happy Quatermass Day. Happy Aliens Day. And non-patrons, thank you very much for your support. Patrons, I hope you don't mind sharing the goods at the same time for once with those that are out there. Well, you'll still get it probably a couple of hours earlier just because of the way these things upload. But I'm grateful to everybody whose support manifests itself in all sorts of different ways. Now that contact has been established, let's never lose touch. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and on this occasion my special guests were John Deere and Andy Murray. Do please find them both on Blue Sky and buy their books. And I'm grateful to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Stephen Moffat, not that one, Peter Burns, James Correa Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Stuart Johnson, George Bell, Ian Redman, Elliot Stonhill, Jack Rayner, John Caliber, Ultan, Paul Hull, Craig Williams, Daniel Frankham, Richard Gray, Andy Kaminsky, Patrick Stratford, Matthew James, Matthew Bovington, Tom, Andrew Hughes, Tim Arding, Nigel Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Chamberlain, Grant Davidson, John Deere, there he is again, Chris Dunford Kelk, Paul Dunn, Susie Ferguson, Jason Gorman, Siobhan Galichon, Paul Harris, Ruben Herfindahl, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Ashley Knight, Joe Llewellyn, Ian K. McLaughlin, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Graham Knott, Michael Page, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto Matty Cirillo, Frank Shales, Daniel Smith and Jonathan Spencer. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. So, if you are one of those out there who is not a patron, well, maybe this has tempted you. I hope so, because for as little as £3 a month, you get advance releases, you get behind-the-scenes looks at my DVD and Blu-ray extras, you get interviews from my archives, you get monthly, sometimes more than once a month, Ask Me Anythings, and most of my output podcast releases are several months ahead. In the case of Happy Times and Places, after this summer it's going to be more than 6 months ahead, so there's and you usually get 3 releases a week, whereas you only get one out there in the great wild west, beyond, in that place that's pitch dark both day and night, empty and cold, outside the safe haven of Patreon. So that's patreon.com/Toby Haydock. You can also contribute if you'd like to at Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock, which doesn't tie you into a monthly obligation, but it also doesn't get you any of the bonus stuff. Or you can continue what you've been doing, listening to these. I'm really, really grateful for the downloads, for the listens. And if you can add to that any likes, any subscribes, any 5-star reviews, any thumbs ups, any lines anywhere on any outlet saying what you like about these, tweets and retweets and all sorts of stuff that draw attention to my output, that stuff is really, really helpful and costs you nothing but a tiniest bit of your time. I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter at Haydock Podcasts and at Toby Haydock. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram at Toby.Haydock. I have a Facebook fan page thing. Oh, I hate saying that. I've got a private Facebook page, but it's full up, and I'm trying to sort of leave that for people I've actually met. But all my stuff also goes on that other one, which is managed to be more about my sort of work output. You don't need to see if my mum's been round. And so do all that. I'm not on TikTok or OnlyFans yet. So there we go, July the 18th, and that's 73 years. It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, because when I started writing the book in 1989, well, when I started writing to people with the idea of writing the book, 89, 79, 69, 59, it was 36 years ago. So that is now much longer ago than the Quatermass experiment was when I started writing. And when I started writing to people, it seemed like I was reaching back into the dim and distant past, and I would get cobwebby and dusty as I did so, and that anyone I touched must be ancient. Well, if I'd been in the equivalent of the Quatermass experiment 36 years ago, I could have been, couldn't I? Because 36 years ago, I would have been 46. I would have been 16. So yeah, I could have been. So the guy who played the boy in the Quatermass experiment would have been younger than I am now when I first started writing to people. Gosh. And I've never tracked him down. Anthony Green, are you out there? Does anybody know a former child actor called Anthony Green? I'd love to get an interview with him. It would be too late for my book. So that would be the sort of victory that I'm used to. I'd get a brilliant thing far too late. But it's appropriate to Quatermass because things are usually just slightly too late in Quatermass, and that's what makes it so exciting. Anyway, happy Quatermass Day. And look, I'm a glass half empty kind of guy, but I read those script books over and over and over and over again. And I wanted to write a book, but I didn't sort of, in my heart, I sort of thought it wasn't possible. I read those lines out loud. I never imagined that. And in fact, there was a remake, wasn't there? There was a live remake on BBC 4, and I wasn't in that. So I was like, well, I mean, a remake happened, and I missed the boat with that. So, every time, quite often, things have been close to my dreams coming true, but I haven't been able to be a part of it or whatever. And yet, you hold on in there. You keep persevering. Things go terribly wrong. Your mates mutate. Your wife dies or leaves. In Quatermass's case, dies. In my case, gets rid of me. Terrible things happen. But still you persevere. Still you can get there. That's the lesson, eh? Happy Quatermass Day.